Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Listen to the two stories and decide which one is better.
The aloofness, the unwillingness to spend time together shows that something is wrong, or does it? In today's story, we're going to find out if that's the case. Enjoy watching it. He sanded the wood, blew a little on the surface, and contemplated the winding trail of darkness on the tan wood of the keel. It was definitely a crack, but the question of nature versus nurture remained. If the crack was at surface level, he could fill it with epoxy and sand it down. If the crack ran along the board, it meant the wood was simply bad, and he would have to rebuild the boat to replace the doomed part. Richard Thomas looked again at the warm, oily glow of the house lights 100 yards away as darkness began to permeate the air around him. Putting it off as long as possible, he went back to his cheerless home. Once upon a time, everything had seemed more promising. Shortly after graduating from college, he married Karen Johnson, his high school sweetheart. She wouldn't have even talked to a guy like him, who came from a dysfunctional family, but she met him at the club of their church, which preached free markets and social justice. "Be kind to children from dysfunctional families," said her father, a psychologist. "They are more like wild animals because life has treated them harshly. Don't expect them to care about helping others, only themselves." Karen kept her distance from most of them, but as she stared into space, she happened to meet Richard's eyes. "Hello," he said to her casually. She saw a rather muscular boy with bright blue eyes and honey-colored hair, quite handsome, just above average height, an inch under 6 feet. She knew he was a bit of a failure in the class, who still got pretty good grades and had built himself some kind of award-winning boat. He scared her because his father was an oil company executive, and according to her parents, they were evil people. She knew Richard as a sharp and outspoken guy who often left behind grudges. "Hello there," she said with typical teenage irreverence. He saw a slender girl with an innocent face, unreadable gray eyes, and bright brown hair. She carried herself as elegantly as a dancer and had muscles from playing field hockey. He knew she got good grades, but she was quiet in class, as if she were waiting for some reason to come out of her shell. An inch shorter than him, she seemed lively but reluctant to give much away to the world, although he suspected that if she ever became confident enough to have her own opinions, she would have a lot of insight. They talked for the rest of the night, covering every possible topic intertwined with predictable questions of reproduction. That evening, Karen returned home in a state of deep confusion. Like most of her generation, Karen had no idea what love was or how it related to attraction and lust. She got one vision from the classic books she read in school, another from Hollywood and popular music, and a third from church and her parents. In the movies, a handsome man and a beautiful woman met in some awkward situation, then began to fight in what her psychologist aunt called a codependent relationship, but eventually fell into bed together and discovered in the morning that they were in love. The books she was given at school praised men and women who defied social pressure to remain virtuous and then met their true love and companion by doing something selfless. Her parents insisted on finding a man with a good career who would not destroy the family, but they also refused to treat her unfairly. She had never seen Richard as anything other than one of the children she would leave with the rest of the high school students, but she felt something that might have been a desire to please him, to gain his approval, or even to be desired by him. Karen and Richard met during their senior year of high school, that bittersweet time when people knew that growing up soon would destroy old friendships and loves. She knew Richard scared her, too. One day during a history lesson, the teacher noticed that most of the students were catatonic or asleep and turned to Richard with a question about Hitler and Stalin. "Who are they?" he asked. Richard replied, "Stalin, a former bank robber, confused power with importance and turned his country into a bureaucratic dictatorship that killed 30 million of its people due to sheer incompetence. Hitler, an artist, confused his popularity with moral righteousness and started a war that devastated his country. A good leader rules for the sake of his people, not for his own power or self-esteem." The teacher wrinkled his brow, and half the class perked up. "What about war crimes, genocide, and oppression?" Richard chuckled. "History is written in cruelty and extermination because these are the only signals that awaken people. Otherwise, they simply followed their own momentum. Hitler was like Robespierre, a true believer who ended up executing everyone who disagreed because he needed to believe that his ideology was correct. Stalin was more like Genghis Khan, a glorified criminal or Third World warlord who knew his ideology was nonsense and, as a result, was able to survive it by largely sacrificing others. They are almost as bad as our current leaders, who are doing the same thing to us, only slower. At that moment, Karen realized there was something about Richard that she could not tame. She liked domesticated men like her father, who followed the rules. When her mother had needs, he satisfied them. If he disagreed, he bit his lip and reluctantly fulfilled them. Her two parents were equals and discussed every decision together, which made Richard look like some kind of wild animal who acted purely on instinct and heart. She knew it was impossible to control him, but she also sensed in her gut that he was the only man she could ever truly love. "You need to date other boys," her mother Beverly said. "You can't live your whole life with just one man. It will always be an unequal relationship in which you will have the advantage. He needs to know there are absolute rules that he cannot break. Marriage is like a small social group where, unless you give power to yourself, you will be forced to conform to what others want." So, Karen found herself asserting herself and dating other boys. She never went beyond copious caresses, which made her more popular, and she graduated from high school on a high note. If Richard noticed that her skills had improved, he never questioned why, or at least never said anything. Richard received a full scholarship to the same local university she attended, but Karen's mother decided to explore a wider range of intimate partners. No one was fooled by her late work or girls' nights out. The marriage fell apart like a sparrow hit by a space shuttle, scattering Karen and her brothers into different apartments on both ends of the city, with varying degrees of financial struggle. She finally understood what Richard had been through, except that, because his father was an executive at a major oil company, he had more money than her parents, the guidance counselor, and the high school history teacher. She escaped the poverty and chaos in her life through her marriage to Richard. He got his first big job, and kids started showing up, Daniel, when Richard was still in his entry-level position, and Robert and Suzanne after each of his promotions. Soon, they had a nice house in a decent suburb. "Are you satisfied?" Richard asked Karen one evening. "I think so," she replied, "but I'm not sure that's the question." "Are you happy?" "Happy," he said. "I do not believe in this." He read to her from a book he was reading, one of his old favorites that she never liked. "You're a terrible driver," he retorted. "You need to be more careful, or don't drive at all." "I will be careful." "No, not like this." "Well, other people are careful," she replied lightly. "So what?" "They will stay away," he insisted. "It takes two to make an accident. Suppose you meet someone as careless as you?" "I hope I never do," she replied. "I hate careless people. That's why I like you." "Each of us is responsible for our own happiness," Richard said. "It's a matter of responsibility to your true self. You have to make yourself good so that you can love yourself, and only then can you appreciate what life really is." She looked at him as if she barely knew him. "It seems bleak." "Not at all. Just a realistic look," said Richard, lighting his pipe. "Who you are, your work, and how others see you is not who you are. You choose to become who you are. Even love is a choice. As Siddhartha would say, external events are not happy or sad, but thinking makes them so." Time passed, and they both forgot this conversation as it faded into history. By her mid-30s, Karen was managing a brood that was beginning to be mature enough to fend for itself. As parents learn, by the time children reach adolescence, your window of opportunity to teach them anything has passed. They begin to enter adulthood, even if only in the early stages, and make decisions for themselves based in part on what they have learned from their parents, to the extent that they trust them to teach. Richard went from a job where he simply did what he was told to being a business owner, which meant he spent most of his waking moments thinking about how to maneuver his company so that there would be enough money to be sustainable, finding a market niche where it could grow. He now had 3 employees, 2 negotiators, and an office manager. His office manager, Sue Scott, came to him straight out of graduate school. She earned a Master of Fine Arts degree in creative writing, only to discover that the insular small community that favored the next big thing in literature had distinct tastes. She, who loved both the classics and ancient texts, her bachelor's degree was in classical languages, could not make a career in the world of the latest ironic styles and personal quirks. What do you hope to achieve here? Richard asked without looking up. Sue looked at him with her bright blue-gray eyes. Mr. Thomas, I like to speak directly, she said after a few seconds. I need a job that I won't hate. My degree is kind of useless, so I'm starting from scratch, and I want to learn practical business management skills so that one day I can open a cat shelter and prevent it from going under like most of them. A few years later, I'm here because of all the places I called, the people here seemed real, and everyone was honest with me. Richard thought about it. You're accepted, he said. He blushed and then looked away. No, it's not because of your, appearance. We're professionals here, and we don't do this because it would harm the other person. I warn you, I'm not a sensitive person, I'm a caveman, but I like fair play. No, you took a chance with this answer, told the truth, and seemed very competent based on your undergraduate work and part-time job, so I'm betting on you. Although she started out unsure, having to learn what was essentially a new business language, she quickly mastered it once she gained confidence. Richard was not attracted to her at first, although she was an attractive girl next door with a slender, graceful face and body. But when he began to rely on her daily, he saw her as smart and hardworking. However, he was committed to his marriage, his business, and his concept of fair play, which meant he didn't cross the line, especially with someone several years younger than him and financially vulnerable. What? She asked one day. Sorry, he said. You looked at me as if you wanted to say something. She said this, apparently not noticing his deep, smoky gaze, which he forgot to hide for a moment. Oh, just thinking about this meeting with a client, he said. This turned out to be fortunate because later that week, she showed up with her boyfriend, Alex. He was a dancer, as muscular as a boa constrictor and as agile as he could balance on one leg on the railing above their 2-story conference room. Richard went home and took a cold shower, realizing for the first time the pain of temptation and the satisfaction of overcoming it. He was tested, and he survived. Life went on, and he was soon immersed again in the development of his company, his first attempt to renovate the old sailboat left to him by his grandfather, and caring for his children. He quickly forgot about Sue as a colleague and was grateful for that. With more free time on her hands, Karen got a job at an advertising agency where her uncle worked. The kids were already busy like adults, sports, rock bands, art classes, ballet, debate, and martial arts after school, and then on their phones or doing homework until midnight. She started as an administrative assistant. During her second week on the job, her boss quit, and before Karen knew it, she had taken over the position. This required her to spend at least 10 hours a day in the office, but by getting up early, she could get it done, and her husband, who came home early, could cook dinner for the children. She shared her fears with her mother, Beverly. I feel like I'm becoming two different people. One is me at home, where there's no fame, just more socks to wash. The other is my career, where I'm growing fast, and now I want to move to the city. It's a necessary part of growing up, her mother said. You overcame inequality as a woman, refused to let society define who you are. Now who you are matters. You're part of this economy and culture, and now you matter more than that loser you married. He's not a loser, Karen said. He came back and got an MBA and a law degree and now runs a firm of negotiators. We live very comfortably. Yes, but who will remember him when he dies? Her mother asked. He's just another faceless face in a suit and tie. You, on the other hand, are pushing boundaries by having a job that is progressive and will soon become extremely lucrative. Your life becomes meaningful because of who you are and what you do. Beverly was still working at the same job in the school district where she met the man she intended to be her second husband. It turned out, however, that his wife was willing to forgive his misdeeds, so he returned to her and never eloped with Bev, as they had planned. She ended up living alone but enjoyed an active social life and was featured in several local magazines for her work, bringing Christian compassion to those in need. When Karen brought a casserole to her father, who lived in an apartment he could afford after alimony and child support, he expressed caution. Don't let your job become your soul, they're not worth it. You're the same with or without a job, and family is just a bonus. You'll always be my smart, loving, kind girl. Trust me, I've given too many years to work, church, and politics. I wish I could spend this time making more connections with people. If you want to be famous, write a book or something." Now Karen wandered in doubt through the catacombs of her mind. She was never the girl everyone knew and talked about, just the quiet one, although highly regarded and respected. Although Richard provided a good income and was a loving father, he was not like the men she read about in the news who were inventing new social networks, building rockets, or running nonprofits that provided microloans to starving people in the third world. Karen was promoted again when the company split in response to a potential merger. Half the staff left out of disgust at being taken over by their competitors, but for Karen, the move was brilliant because it more than doubled their market share. She filled positions left by deserters, and when she presented her ideas to her boss, Jeb Sheen, he perked up, seeing the potential of her new direction in marketing, which combined sound capitalist wisdom with human rights activism, and insisted that she work with him directly. Soon, she began spending more time in the office. Her family, like all organic things, adapted. Daniel did more of the cooking, as did Richard. The younger ones helped wash vegetables and clean the house. They were all proud of her, she thought, although she felt some hesitation on the part of her husband. During this period, she became close to Jeb, and they developed a strong working relationship as they reorganized the bloated company into a hard-hitting team bent on market dominance. Her friends barely recognized her. Karen updated her wardrobe and spent an hour every morning on her home elliptical machine. She knew she looked like $1,000,000 because heads turned when she walked into a room. The former wallflower of her school days not only broke through the glass ceiling and destroyed inequality but also became coveted for her mind, body, and personality. Her family retreated to the level of a line in her biography. Richard watched this from afar, having seen it many times in his work. Eventually, his mother left to become an executive vice president in Bangkok, but he never told Karen about it. What was at first an inner restlessness became a heaviness, then an emptiness, and finally a perversion. He began to notice that he sometimes felt short of breath, as if he forgot to breathe, and that he often felt a cramp in his stomach. "You know," Richard said one day as they cut green beans for Saturday dinner, "I always try to apply the wife test at work. If I was doing something and you came in and were upset about what I was doing, I wouldn't want to do that. That even includes being behind closed doors alone with a female colleague." "Oh honey, I don't care," Karen said absently, and Richard saw her outlook change at that moment. There was no jealousy, which meant she no longer cared enough about him to possess him to the exclusion of everyone else. For love to exist, Richard knew it had to be jealous, otherwise, it was simply using another person for convenience. "It's a good rule," he said. "I mean, if you want to keep your spouse happy." "Are you happy, Karen?" Karen didn't say anything. They fed the kids, watched a terrible action movie that made everyone happy with its gross action, and then went to bed. Richard pressed himself close to Karen and tried to interest her, but she turned away. "Not now," she said, in the same voice she used with her subordinates. She turned and, under the light of a small book lamp, began looking through a folder of documents related to her company's upcoming merger. Richard fell into a restless sleep. He knew from biology class that when a female rejected a male, it meant she considered the other male to be of higher status and would never return to the old one unless her best bet failed. Having grown up with the idea that love meant abandoning all others rather than constantly seeking the next opportunity, he found her response troubling. He fell into a restless sleep in which dark thoughts and images disturbed him. He was nowhere to be found when Karen got up, but he soon came running up the driveway. Over the next few weeks, Richard increased his runs to 5 miles a day, worked out in their home gym in the garage, and updated his old scruffy wardrobe. On Saturday night, the babysitter showed up, and he took Karen to her favorite Italian restaurant, a movie, and a new trendy club for cocktails and dancing. She danced with him twice, then checked her phone and said it was time to go home. He was afraid of something he had seen many times before. People confused signals with action, maps with territory, appearance with reality, gesture with meaning, and who they were with who they really were. The grass was always greener, he thought, because he knew the disadvantages of his current situation but only saw the advantages of a change. On new grass, things started out well in his experience but then ended disastrously. He redoubled his efforts. He came to her work with flowers and noticed how her secretary rolled her eyes. He wondered what she had been told about him. He called her twice a day without exception and repeated his Saturday evening maneuvers. He lost 5 pounds, so he increased his workouts and soon saw improved muscle definition. In a desperate attempt, he bought her a necklace that she had noticed in the window of one of the jewelry stores. He felt the approach of error like a distant storm but was powerless to stop it. In each case, she expressed gratitude, stayed for the minimum amount of time necessary to be polite, and then excused herself to do some work in preparation for the next day. "You've been pretty distant lately," he said one night. "What can I do to keep our marriage afloat?" He looked at her with empty eyes. He knew there were 2 options. She could admit the problem, they could work on it, and life would go on because they were united. This meant she still believed in him, respected him, and was on his team, working toward their mutual interests. Alternatively, she could deny the problem because she either didn't think it could be solved or had no interest in doing so. This meant that in her heart and mind, she had already left the marriage and saw it as something that didn't matter. "What do you mean?" Karen answered evasively. "We don't spend time together anymore, we barely make love, and when that happens, it's like you're waiting for a taxi. We rarely talk. I haven't seen you smile at me without a reminder or spend time with me unless I demand it since you started this job," Richard said. He knew where this was going, and to his surprise, it didn't make him angry, it made him sick, ill, and restless. He saw everything he wanted slip away like a candle melting and pouring down the drain. Karen looked straight at him. For him, it was a crisis. For her, this was a delicate situation that she had to put off, like postponing a supplier who wanted to be paid at her job. In her mind, she would eventually return to the marriage, which she now believed was something she had agreed to. Right now, she had bigger opportunities, and marriage was her backup plan in case she finished enjoying all life had to offer. "I didn't notice the problem," she said lightly. They went to bed that night in different worlds. They could have been in isolated dimensions on distant planets or different species. For whatever they had in common now, Richard wondered where he had gone wrong. He then realized that Karen had always had a crusader in her life defending the oppressed against the powerful. By being a good husband and provider, he had become a powerful entity that she rebelled against and gladly defeated. He spoke with his longtime friend, Sheriff Danville Harris, who had advised his father during his divorce. "She's dancing with the devil," the sheriff said. "I've never been into religion, other than to generally believe that some benevolent force created this place and is looking after us since we're basically suicidal idiots most of the time." He laughed. "I always thought that the God of the Old Testament must have had a giant bottle of Advil watching his people go out and do nothing but make endless mistakes because their egos got in the way. At the police academy, we were told a little about Jung and Freud and the ego in ID. Basically, it looked like this." The sheriff lit one of the Italian cigars he preferred, cutting it in half through the bulge in the middle with his pocket knife. "The ID makes decisions. It is essentially who we are in our instincts and souls. The ego explains what happens in response to our decisions in such a way that we look good in the eyes of ourselves and others, which is what we believe we are. The ID is essentially a plurality of conflicting impulses, and the one that is least destructive and most beneficial, at least in theory, wins." He exhaled smoke and continued, "In the academy, we were told to explain things to the ego so that the ID chooses the path of least resistance. Make fight or flight impossible, offer some food, and you can get them into the system without violence. Most of the time, your wife is doing the opposite. Her ego makes the decisions, causing the ID to follow it, which makes her lose her sense of who she is." "I guess the question for you," the sheriff said lightly, lighting his dwindling cigar, "is whether you want to fix this. After all, she, as they say, showed you her 5th place. This is not just a superficial blemish, it's something that went wrong deep inside her. Life is just stairs. When you go where you need to go, it's a hard climb. When you go somewhere bad, it's a jump down. She got caught on a descending staircase somewhere and can't find the ascending one. Do you think she cheated on you?" "No," said Richard, "not physically. Not yet. But in her mind, she is ready, and now that I know this, I will never be able to enjoy her again. My trust in her is destroyed, and the same goes for my respect. Following her own giving up on me, she just threw away my love, trust, affection, and hope. That's certainly true, the sheriff said. When you choose another man, you tell the first man that he is not good enough for you. This leads to two paths. Either you take him back but despise him, or you reject him so as not to despise yourself for agreeing. Once they make a decision, in my experience, they may not be out the door right away, but they are already on their way. Yes, said Richard gloomily. Well, thanks, Sheriff. I'll think of something. The next time he saw Karen, on a night when she wasn't working late, he gently suggested that they spend more time together to keep the marriage healthy. He then tried to invite her to ballroom dancing lessons, but she refused, using her workload as an excuse. He devoted hours to foot massages, conversations, and higher grades of wine, but in each case, he felt her contempt, realized how little he meant in her eyes, and felt the heaviness in his stomach building up to several tons of dark hopelessness and gray despair. Finally, he simply asked, "Do you want to get a divorce?" "What?" said Karen. "Why do you ask?" "First, I want a yes or no answer." Karen returned to her reading. "No, I do not think so." "Why?" "Well, that wouldn't make sense, would it? We have kids, we have a house, we both have careers where we benefit from having spouses." And, Richard said slowly, drawing out the syllables, "I love you." Karen, her eyes now looking at the floor, replied, "We'll grow old together, we'll have grandchildren. We can get that lake house we've always talked about and spend our golden years there." Richard looked at her, his eyes clear, but she couldn't see the tragedy in them. When they were in love, she would have told him he was a big stupid idiot and kissed him. Now, she treated him like one of her subordinates at work or maybe like an unyielding supplier, essentially reprimanding him into silence. How about meeting him halfway, supporting him, and expressing love? No, it was as dead as their night life. Robert, age 14, gave him the next piece of the puzzle. Since all of life is a mystery, the first step in solving a mystery is to identify all the elements involved. You know the girl I was going to the fall dance with? She left me to go camping with Owen Rogers and his weird family, the one you gave the necklace to. Yes, just a week ago, Robert said. You know, alpha males and beta females want a stable guy to provide money and a stud for intim. He blushed slightly from using that language. You're a nerd, but you're also a stud, Richard said, ruffling his hair. It will take a few years for it to become obvious, but some girl will realize that you are a worthy match. Do you want to come to the gym with me? We can pump you up a little. Yes, said Robert, that would be great. I noticed you've put on some muscle too. For miles away, a shamefully close distance, separated by social conventions that said men shouldn't just show up at their wives' work, Jab had a similar conversation with Karen. He's a good guy, a reliable husband, Jab said, but you and I are doing something big here. This will be the first advertising agency in history to combine good deeds and big profits. We will make history, so I need you to be fully involved if you understand what I'm talking about. Karen looked up, her gaze dry. They both knew what he was talking about. Back home, Richard fed the kids, read to Suzanne, helped Ka with geometry, and called Daniel, who was attending the state university on a full scholarship. He decided to stop wasting time on his wife and instead enjoy his children more. When Karen returned home and went straight to the shower, taking her phone with her, he shuddered in bed. His stomach began to twist painfully again, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He barely slept that night, although Karen purred gently like a cat. When he looked in the mirror in the morning, he saw a dead seriousness in his eyes and a lack of sparkle in them. Their usual bright blue color had diminished to an immense cobalt. He didn't recognize the expression at first, but then he remembered it from working on a school project as a volunteer at a veterans hospital, where he met men who had seen too much war. These were the eyes of a man trying to hold onto his agony, unsure if the devil from within would break out at any moment and leave behind a devastated, bloody wasteland. Everything is fine, Sue asked him mid-morning. They were struggling with a new contract that would limit their schedule and possibly be unprofitable. I just didn't get enough sleep, he said. That's all. I'll grab some more coffee and get ready. She looked at him with concern. I'll get the coffee. Don't get used to it. He smiled despite himself, and by the end of the day, He had everything in place, renegotiated the contract for additional fees, and created a 6-month schedule that he could adapt to existing clients. He said goodbye and began the journey home, allowing his mind to unfocus and relax as he had learned long ago in his Vipassana training. Then it dawned on him on 2 levels. Marriage was a love partnership, a family, and a business. He needed to approach his problem in a business-like manner and use business logic to solve it. Over the past few days, he had been researching topics about adultery. Most of them, it turned out, were simply bored and felt insignificant. This usually happened at work, which was a substitute for the sense of well-being provided by family. When self-pity and lust coincided, the desire became strong. Most affairs went unnoticed, although in his experience, this usually meant that the marriage was a zombie, a once living being now dead but reanimated without a soul. Very few affairs lasted long, although he noted that a person who cheated once was more likely to do it again. He also found stories on internet sites about such tragedies. He found them incredible. He couldn't imagine wanting to hurt his wife or feeling angry. He felt pain instead. A deep pain resonated throughout his body, pulsing through his eyes and fingertips with every breath he took. It was just a tragedy, an insoluble tragedy. He found stories of reconciliation unrealistic and overly emotional. What was broken could not be repaired. Dad came at him at the door. He looked up and saw 3 pairs of eyes, his children watching him carefully. They knew. He realized they always knew, recalling how he felt the inner pain and anxiety when his mother returned home late. He remembered looking up and catching his father's gaze, seeing the same dull seriousness and steadfastness there. People in pain see life in terms of diminished possibilities, he realized. So, his first step was not to act on those feelings. The second was to take care of his children. When Karen returned home late, she walked into an immaculate house. 2 large pizza boxes were in the recycling bin, homework was done, and the kids were in bed. She couldn't find her husband, at least not until she looked into the backyard. There he was, by the light of a Coleman lantern, sanding that old boat. She turned on the kitchen light, knowing she would be illuminated by the full-sized windows. He looked up but didn't wave. On Friday morning, he came home sweating from a run. Karen was just getting ready to leave. "Richard," she said as if she had suddenly remembered something. He felt the tension in the air between them. "I forgot to tell you, I'm going on a business trip for the weekend," she said. He nodded. There was no point in telling her not to do it. She had already made her decision in her mind and heart. He knew from his readings that the act of cheating occurred when the cheater psychologically demoted their spouse to the level of a person who needed to be deceived, manipulated, and directed. Almost all of them saw it as something owed to them or compensation for past wounds, and so they weren't just using their spouses. On some level, they even hated them, even if they couldn't admit it. Richard believed that society exists on 2 levels corresponding to the ego and the ID. The ID consisted of repressed desires left over from nature, but the ego explained them to itself as something good and not bad. When he heard someone say, "We are all equal," his mind translated it as, "I am first." When they talked about patriotism or free markets, it meant, "and others serve me," he thought. Karen was different. He loved the shy, sensitive, and perceptive girl he first met at that church gathering. On their first date, he didn't mention this to her for a while, adhering to the code of fair play that he and his father shared, as he didn't want to embarrass or manipulate her. He wondered if he had always been wrong or if something had finally caught up with her and pushed her over the edge. "Is there something I should know?" he asked softly. "No, Richard, nothing," she said, looking annoyed, then got into her car and drove off. Nothing. This was the feeling that descended on his soul, an eternal and endless emptiness where nothing mattered except the sensation of the moment. He wanted to become one with the void, clear his mind of everything, and exist only in that crystalline structure of logic where every detail was in its place, forming layers of knowledge, each level dependent on the lower one. He wanted to separate himself from emotions, sensations, desires, and most importantly, the awareness of who he was and what situation he was in. "Dad?" Suzanne asked, looking into his eyes. Richard returned to consciousness. The work was over, and he had managed it somehow. Now he was home with his children. The clarity of his inner world connected to the outer world beyond his immediate concerns was a great refuge. Emotions returned to him quickly: anxiety, the feeling of watching the tragedy from afar, and a heavy, deep sense of loss. "This too shall pass," he reminded himself and turned to his daughter. "Are you okay?" she asked in her thin, trembling, childish voice. "Now that you're here, I'm wonderful," said Richard. He went to work. He did it well. He was brilliant, even inspired. He put all his nervous energy and growing sense of despair into the work, and the results were good. Now he had to take care of his little ones, taking an hour or so after work to clear his mind. Then he looked at his watch. "I'm late for dinner," he said. "It's pizza time again, kids." There were cheers, and they settled in for a few rounds of some hopelessly violent video game while Ka was reading and Suzanne watched an animated movie about a duck who saved the world with a chainsaw or something like that. Richard was a little distracted. The local pizza delivery guy already knew them well, mostly because Richard had thanked him for not chatting. After a fun pizza party, he put everyone to bed. Homework could wait until Sunday. The next day, they went to the zoo. Robert, a little too big for this, politely walked through all the sections and lingered in the reptile house. CA was fascinated by the birds, and they circled the outdoor cages 3 times. Suzanne tried to see all the lions, tigers, bears, and otters, her favorites, but then she began to act up. After being pacified with cotton candy, she fell asleep in her father's arms, sending his shoulder into a deep sleep as well. Then it was time for playing in the backyard, throwing an old foam football and playing games until dusk. Richard remembered his college days and prepared a dinner of hot dogs, bell peppers, spaghetti, cilantro, and tomato sauce with sour cream to make it taste like Alfredo. They then read or played video games around the fire he had built in the pit in the backyard until Richard went back to sanding his boat. He looked out over the long backyard that stretched to the water of the Fourth Canal they lived on in a city riddled with waterways. He could understand the value of owning one of the luxury homes in prominent lake communities, but he knew everything had to be paid for. Here, they could lead a normal life, like other normal people, while being both aware of their unique abilities and humble, enjoying others and their contributions. He knew that everything he did was for the children, and if it killed him, he would not allow them to live the way he lived. Richard never saw himself as a victim. He faced the challenges thrown his way, entered a meditative state, and understood what was really happening. He learned how the situation worked by understanding the structure, mechanism, and processes formed by the relationship between action and consequence. At each level, he could bypass it or make it work for him. He sighed, feeling mature and perhaps older than he was. This morning, student Richard, the guy with a shocking haircut, big muscles, and a lust for life, would look at this quiet existence and laugh, then crush a few more cans of Milwaukee's Best and go on another escapade. Or maybe not. Somewhere inside, Richard knew that he had always wanted this. He distrusted greatness and preferred an ordinary life in which his mind was clear, so that if he discovered an opportunity for some great invention or moment in history, he could seize that day without mental confusion. On Sunday, they went to church. Richard knew in his gut that he believed in God, even if he did not trust any book written by man, because he understood cause and effect. The sky is dark at night, however, dark skies can be caused by weather, a solar eclipse, or even the final battle at Armageddon between the forces of order and chaos. However, if the world as a whole was good, only one thing could cause it, and in the depths of his heart, Richard had long ago found and loved God, even if he hated organized religion as much as he despised politics and social media. Monday started bright and early, and he took the kids to the local Montessori school, which was less Montessori and more classical education with a modern twist. When he entered the school, the staff room smelled of coffee and cigarettes. Some hippies were good, just as some oil company executives were decent and honest people. In this world, everything was more complex than even emotions. Richard chatted amiably as he ran off to work, then worked hard at his keyboard, telephone, and filing cabinet for about 10 hours before returning home. Sue looked at him with some caution, but he responded with a slightly absent smile, conveying pleasure in what he was doing and determination. When you are a boss, you must lead your people for their good, and if you must deceive them, it must, without exception, be in their interests, even if they do not understand it, he thought. Speaking of tyrants, his wife returned home late. When dinner was already on the table, she announced that she had eaten and went into the shower. The children exchanged knowing glances. Richard looked at his children, a mixture of his wisdom and their mother's indomitable intellect and passion, and knew that they would not be fooled. "Listen, guys," he said suddenly, out of breath, "you know I love you, right?" They nodded, their bright, wet eyes looking at him. "I will always be here for you, and so will Mom," Richard said. "If you trust me, don't worry about anything. We'll get through this." Surprisingly, it worked. Children, creatures of an age of innocence that fades almost invisibly like the skin of an onion, trusted the firm word of an adult who seemed to have a plan. He helped them with their homework, assisted them with algebra that he didn't know he remembered, and then he put on his old fishing hat and went to the boathouse. He wanted to look at that keel again and saw with new eyes how the crack could have been something the original builders hadn't noticed, maybe a knot in the wood or some deep rot. He made a mental note to buy a replacement, then began to dismantle the boat. Maybe he could do some extra oiling and sanding of the replacement to make the seals tighter. As he walked toward the trash cans with an armful of dead wood, he heard Karen on the phone. She was looking into the living room, not noticing his presence, so he stopped to rearrange the pile of wood scraps he was carrying. "When I came back this morning," she said, turning slightly, then stopped. He looked up and saw her eyes in the mirror on the wall leading into the living room. She looked straight into his eyes. "I mean, in the evening," she continued loudly, going into another room and leaving what she was cleaning in the kitchen. At that moment, it all started. Richard leaned forward, the wood crumbled around him, and he vomited onto a small concrete area where the trash can stood. He vomited once, twice, 3 times, spilling a mixture of half-digested food, soda he unwisely drank at work, and stomach acid that was so acidic he could hear it fizzing and crackling as it spread across the concrete. With an empty stomach, he wiped his mouth, then took the hose and sprayed the concrete, picking up the rotten wood now smelling faintly of phosphoric and hydrochloric acid. He tossed it into the trash can, then weakly slammed the lid shut. Until this moment, he had his suspicions. Now he knew in his gut but had no proof. He wasn't even sure he wanted them or that it mattered, but the part of him that was rigid about fair play insisted he ponder these thoughts as he walked up the stairs. However, as soon as he entered the bedroom, he ran to the toilet, expelling even more of the contents of his digestive tract. The vomit twisted him so much that tears streamed from his eyes as he fell to the floor. Strangely, he did not feel sick, he simply vomited with great force, throwing the foul-smelling liquid into the toilet. He didn't feel bad but rather unreal, unsteady. His condition was closer to seasickness, motion sickness, or heartache. Mumbling something about how he felt bad, he took a pillow and went to the sofa. Soon, he was fast asleep. The day went surprisingly well. He accomplished a lot for a man who was worried that his life was being torn apart. He drank extra water all day, did a good job, smiled every time one of his 3 coworkers walked by, and came home early to make dinner for the kids. They had a great time until Karen returned home, at which point Richard rushed into the bathroom, water in his eyes and drool coming out of the corners of his mouth. He vomited like a man on the verge of suicide, his body jerking back and forth, causing bright spots in his vision and dizziness. This time, the guest room offered no shelter, so he gathered some blankets and took the key to the boathouse, a simple house designed for boat storage with double doors, its own air conditioning, and a refrigerator for the boat beer parties he once hoped to host. He fell asleep on the old sofa, which he inherited from his grandmother, wrapped twice in blankets, shivering, not from the cold but from the icy horror that came from within. The next morning, he waited until she left for work, then took the children to school and arrived at his office. He told Sue he would be working remotely, grabbed some files and a laptop, and turned to leave. "Do you remember your rules about fair play, Mr. Thomas?" said Sue. "And how are you supposed to do what's right for people even if they don't understand it?" She handed him her car keys. "I heard something, Mr. Thomas," she said. "I hope that's not true, but if it is, you'll want to know every terrible detail, won't you? Like all your friends said, Richard takes the pain, so take my car, tank full, and do what you need to do. She doesn't have it if she finds out." He stared at the keys. "Thank you, Sue." "I owe you one," he said, handing her his keys, unable to meet her eyes. To hell with it, she whispered. When he left, he drove her little Honda to an upscale mini-mall sandwiched between a school and a church, where there were 2 real estate agencies and an old colonial house with one-way mirrored glass that housed an advertising agency. As he parked at the church, he pulled out his binoculars and wrote down the license plate numbers of the cars in the parking lot, along with their descriptions on his legal pad. He recorded the times of their arrival and departure. Luckily, the office didn't have a gated parking lot, so when Jeb walked out, Richard could clearly see Karen getting into her car. He took some photos with Daniel's old camera. Once they left, he did nothing. The traffic light system kept them in place, so he waited a couple of minutes before driving out and almost catching up to them at the next light, staying a dozen cars behind. He used binoculars with one eye to know when they were honking. He drove a block forward, turned into an alley, and saw them in the distance, catching up. He knew this part of the city well enough to guess where they were going, to the old Bayou Ridge and at the edge of the woods. That's where I'd go if I wanted to have a sad romance, he thought. Finally, the little Honda pulled into the parking lot, and he got the shots he wanted, the 2 kissing in the car, going into a hotel room, and leaving an hour later. He let them leave, then drove lazily back to the office. They were just going inside when he saw Karen lift her head and look around as if she sensed something, but then she walked through the door. He thanked Sue again in his heart for having the foresight to provide him with an anonymous car. After sending the children to bed, Richard began his nightly ritual in the boathouse. If he stayed too long in the main house, he began to feel nauseous, and his mouth and eyes filled with saliva. Once he was in the quiet of the boathouse, with the waves washing over the small beach 20 feet away, he could sleep soundly on the huge, sturdy couch his grandmother had bought decades ago. It seemed to him that she was still looking after him, hoping that everything would work out. One wonders what Karen thought about all this. Her husband vomited violently in her presence, did not spend time with her on weekends, and seemed to ignore her affairs. They hadn't had an intim before her affair, but after that, it fizzled out, partly because her husband started vomiting as soon as he saw her. It took Richard several months to process what had happened and begin to confront it. One of the bookmarked links on her computer described how to basically shame or humiliate your man. You destroyed his confidence, forced him to know and accept your betrayal, then stopped all affection while commanding him on daily issues. He would adjust over time, she promised. The article left a bad taste in his mouth. It was written by some purple-haired brat with a masculine face and wild eyes, with 3 sides of white visible behind her thick glasses. The article had a gleeful tone, claiming men had been killing, enslaving, and controlling women for centuries. It was time to strike back, apparently by killing the good ones. She enjoyed the manipulation and humiliation. At that moment, Richard realized how truly dead and gone his marriage was because no one who loved him would treat him like that. It was abuse, and his wife was the abuser. He recalled a school counselor warning boys about men who wanted to be their friends. Anyone who does something that is not in your best interest but serves their own is not a friend. He is a predator, or a parasite, or at least someone who wants to use you, and that's not love. That's never love. Get away from that person as quickly as possible. A story that is rarely told in matters of adultery, whether intimate or simply a failure to respect the spouse who constitutes the absolute emotional and moral connection that makes a marriage work, is about children. How does this affect them? Let's take a photo. Robert, Ka, and Suzanne called Daniel at the college to tell him what happened. Daddy lives in the boathouse, Robert said, irritated by how thin and cracked his voice sounded. Mom spends all her time at work, including nights, especially nights, and she often goes on business trips. Daniel sighed. I was worried about it, he said. Mom always had self-esteem issues because she rushed to get married and missed out on what her friends were doing, hanging out in college like in the sisterhood of the traveling pants, having lots of boyfriends, traveling to little villas in Italy like in Under the Tuscan Sun, having adventures like in Eat, Pray, Love. She acts like she's living in The Handmaid's Tale or The Hunger Games. I think she's worried that she's not getting enough attention in her life. She's not here for us, Ka said. We have to look for her to talk to her, and she's always not home. All my friends' moms are home at night and on weekends. Suzanne chimed in, but she's just not there. It's like she abandoned us. Daniel thought about it. What does Daddy say? He always says he'll never leave us, Robert said. He's always there when we go to bed. He goes to the boathouse and sleeps there. Trust my family to be totally weird, Daniel said with a laugh. Well, they have problems, but you have a dad. It's not much different from what happened to Davis and Shelley when their mom left for a trainer, or when Christina's mom ran away to live with her boss, or even in Jake's house where his dad found a new girlfriend and his mom lives in an apartment near the mall. What should we do? Asked Ka. Daniel thought, welcome to adulthood, kids. Other people will disappoint you. Dad won't. He's too honest and generous. Mom might come back from her little adventure, but it's probably like when Roger's mom ran off with the preacher and then came back. Everything will not be the same, or like Kara's parents who opened their relationship and are now just roommates. Or you know how our neighbor started dating her therapist, and when she returned, she and her husband were just roommates without love for dad. As soon as you can get out of here, go to college or join the Air Force or something, asterisk. What is an open relationship? Asked Suzanne. I'll tell you later, Ka quickly answered. Later, when you're 18. She thought, thanks, Dan. Robert said, we can handle this on our own. It sounded more mature than he felt. On the canal, Richard finally launched the boat. He replaced the keel and a lot of planks, but the old sailboat was shiny and had a beautiful wood grain. He redesigned and rebuilt the cabin, replaced a faulty motor that he suspected had simply died from metal fatigue, and headed down the canal to catch the wind on the lake. He recalled an old myth. The ship in which Theseus and the youth of Athens returned from Crete had 30 oars and was preserved by the Athenians down to the time of Demetrius Phalereus, the old planks being replaced by new and stronger ones. So much so that this ship became a constant example among philosophers for the logical question of things that grow. One side argued that the ship remained the same, while the other argued that it was no longer the same ship. Plutarch noted that Theseus had replaced several boards in his life, but it was now more waterproof than ever. He wasn't going to drown because of the decisions of someone who clearly didn't care about him anymore. Although the old boat was only 16 feet long, he rediscovered the joy he had experienced sailing with his grandfather and later with his father. He found that the old skills quickly returned. Karen returned home after another hard day at work. Despite what Jeb had told her years ago, the workload had not decreased, and her firm had not risen higher than it had been. The press bombarded them with articles about their charity work in the third world, but the money didn't come in as quickly as she expected. Her head was starting to hurt, but she wanted a drink. To her surprise, she saw Richard sitting at the kitchen table. "Richard," she said. "How pills?" he replied. "The doctor found something that interrupts the gag reflex. I went to doctors for years, and they were puzzled. One finally asked if I vomited at night, and I said no. He found out that if it doesn't happen during sleep, it's in the head, not the stomach. They did an MRI, and it was terrible, but there were no tumors. It's just psychological. This pill stops vomiting for a few hours so we can talk." "So," she said, "what are we talking about today?" "Nothing special," Richard said quietly. "The kids are gone, so it's time to think about the future. We're both gaining seniority, it's time to protect our assets. The documents in front of you are for the creation of a corporate trust in our names that will manage our assets and protect us from legal liability, especially considering that your firm is playing close to the legal limit and the rumors are getting thicker. Believe me, we need isolation. Have your lawyer look at it and return a signed copy if possible." She looked at the documents, skimming them quickly. It was indeed a legal trust registered in their state, with their attorney as one of the trustees. "Thank you for asking how I am," Richard said. "I'm still living in the boathouse and having a great time. You wouldn't recognize the place with all the renovations I've done there. It even has its own mailbox." He waited to see if she would understand the meaning of this. "I don't know if I need this," she said, looking at the documents. "We're fine the way we are. If I do sign, I'll need to start taking my income out of the family finances and putting it into a trust, which will leave you with just your salary. Remember, this includes our pension plans, so it protects those too. It will also pay the children income from the trust, probably not enough to live on, but enough to give us a little boost in life after we die." "Okay, I'll show this to my lawyer," Karen said. "Thank you," Richard replied. With that, he left and returned to his usual relaxed office work. Sue waited 6 months to make her move. Richard had just completed the final account of one of their oldest clients, and when he turned, she was standing in the doorway, illuminated by the early afternoon sun streaming through the window. She looked nervous, her fingers trembling a little on the folder. "Richard," she said, "what can I do for you?" "I'm glad you're back," she said. None of them needed any explanation. Over the past months, it seemed that they knew each other like old comrades. She could predict his thoughts, and he knew her vocabulary, the words she liked to use, what their use implied, and how they reflected her confidence in any given action. She seemed to do the same for him. If only he had met her first, he thought, but that was impossible, and he would never get his children back. No, it was just a dream, an impossible dream. "Yes, what's done is done," he said. "Actually, I just got over it. People on the internet said I would have rage, but I had sadness. They told me I would drink a lot of bad whiskey, but I still think that this will taste like cough medicine. People said you'll never get over it, but if I have any kind of revenge, this is it. I got through it. Everything I do now is for the sake of the children." "So what about you?" Sue asked, raising an eyebrow. She was very happy that her old boss was back. "An old horror movie," he said, then chuckled at her shocked expression. "Movies, Sue. I like the old horror movies from the 1960s to the mid-90s because after that it was like the Blair Witch Project or Night Shyamalan. Karen hated them and said they scared her, like when her parents fought when she was a child, so I just stopped watching them. Now I'm catching up." He told her about the boathouse, the big screen TV with surround sound, and other details he was implementing as he shaped his life after Karen. "But why did you come to me?" Sue blushed. "I'm looking for new business," she said. "It's complicated." The potential client had once been in a merger with another firm, but now that the merger had partially fallen apart, they might be open to new business. However, their former business partner wanted this segment of their business, so I'm wondering if it's possible to offer my own name, although technically the two companies are still connected. Richard looked at her with typical male bewilderment. He thought they perceived the world literally, as if everything were a mammoth that needed to be hunted or a saber-toothed tiger threatening the tribe in a cave. Only men could invent fire, she realized, but then they would burn everything in childish joy and then just discuss different ways to use the flame. "If the client agrees," he said slowly, "and the merger is really dead, I'd go for it." But when he looked up, she was no longer there. After work, back at the boathouse, he cut down a tree and thought about the conversation. What did she mean? Gradually, it dawned on him. He felt a new sensation in his stomach, a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Did she really mean it? But if so... He suddenly stood up, then sat down again and replayed everything in his mind. 30 minutes later, he set the table for dinner for his children and grabbed his car keys. He turned to the children with a guilty face. "Go," said Robert. "No matter what you did, you haven't looked alive for I don't know how many weeks." Then he burst into tears. Richard held him close and vowed that he would control his emotions for the sake of his children, innocence on the altar of sacrifice caused by an act of serious abuse of what he considered a good marriage. As night fell and the birds gave way to the sounds of insects and the soft sound of sprinklers turning on, he turned the corner of the sidewalk leading to an apartment on the west side of town. The Sheffield apartments took up most of one of the dreariest alleys he had ever seen, but it was a safe and quiet area. He checked the address on his phone and walked to an apartment on the west side of the large, sprawling complex. She opened the door before he knocked. "Did you get my message?" she said. "I'm stupid," he began apologetically. "But you came anyway," she asked. "Why?" "Hope," he spoke. "When we first talked, it became clear to me that you were someone, not something. There was just vitality, honesty, and direction. One door closed, and you opened another. You walked in there with courage and told me the honest truth. At that time, as I now understand, I was surrounded by liars. I was impressed, and I still am. And then today. I try to never be frivolous with employees, especially because I'm married," she said. "But it's over," he replied, "except for providing stability for my children, whom I love more than anything in the world." he finished in a whisper. Richard shook his head to clear his thoughts. I was hoping, not believing, that you were asking me what I would do in your situation. You were conveying the message, unless I was mistaken, that I wouldn't be the bad guy in this equation, and I hoped, until I was sure that what you said, if that's what you said, makes sense. She handed him some kind of drink. He took a sip. It was an imitation of Dr. Pepper from Costco, which was better than the real thing. He took another sip. Thank you, he said. What's done is done, and no matter where I go wrong, I'll never know if I went wrong at all. Sometimes things go wrong, a storm comes, and the chicks fall out of the nest, and you find them the next morning when it's too late. God's guidance or the aimless material universe, I don't know, and I don't think it's my purpose to know. But damn, I'm talking. You've always been on my mind, like one of the most genuine people I've ever met. What about Karen? She asked. What about Alex? He replied. Karen sighed. Now you're making me admit to lying from the start. Alex isn't interested in women, if you know what I mean. He's my ballet instructor, which I do as a hobby because, well, I like it, I guess. I asked him to help put out the fire in the office because I saw the way you looked at me that time, and I knew, and I didn't want to be the other woman. And just like that, hope goes away. I see, said Richard. I guess I got it all wrong. No, she said. Everything has changed. I won't call your wife a fool. She made a choice and knows what kind of person you are. She's gone, Richard, and frankly, I could go and hit the stupid. But I believe in the old saying, never interrupt your enemy when he makes a mistake. She took the drink and took a long sip. So I don't, Richard began, furrowing his brow. No, said Sue. I've known for months. I think you know too. He took a step forward, then pressed his forehead to hers. Hope, he said, she'll kill you every time. Not this time, she said, taking his hands, not for my life. They were talking about something, and he woke up on the couch, sitting next to her and holding her hand. It's unusual, but I'm a conventional girl, she said. The last 1,000 years, maybe more, have been a mistake. There are no rules for this, but if you don't mind going slow, we could do it. They held hands the whole time. Hours later, he turned off the engine and slowed the car, risking parking on the street so as not to wake anyone. It was the most magical night of his life, from the depths of darkness to the heights of mountains bathed in the sunlight of spring morning, yet not a single kiss passed between them. He held her until it was clear what had been done. Now they were conspirators on a mission of hope and faith, lost in a world of people drunk with power and obsessed with death. Could this work? He fell asleep thinking about it. She set the rules, never in the office, never in public, and never in front of his children. They would keep it a secret. But she was, as she put it, fierce, with a look in her eyes reminiscent of her Norman and Scottish ancestors. In that moment, he echoed her sentiment, speaking clearly so that no one, his beloved, the wizards of time, the gods of the grove and field, could mistake its meaning. The choice was eternal, he realized, and any moment could change everything, just like the moments that had destroyed his marriage. He could retreat from the abyss at any time, but this abyss felt only dark on the outside, filled with light on the inside. In the evenings, after the children had gone to sleep at his rapidly improving boathouse, he liked to cook for her. Sometimes, they simply sat and talked. He learned her story, a shy girl with honey-colored hair who wrote well but never fit in, and discovered that she had a black belt in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. She revealed things about him that Karen had never thought to ask, like how he had spent a summer with the volunteer fire department in the Pine Woods. Their personal vocabulary developed, as did their attachments. One evening, sitting on the couch and holding hands, they both knew it was time. There were no words. Eventually, he found the courage to confess his feelings. I love you, Sue, he said. She burst into tears and ran away from the boathouse. He ran after her, but she raised her hand, signaling that she needed time, and then drove away. Lost, Richard returned to the boathouse. How could he hurt her with something he believed was positive? She was absent from work, not cold or distant, just not there. He divided his time between work and sneaking glances in her direction. Questions filled his mind, and he tried to maintain control. Sometimes good guys don't win, he remembered his father saying. When the workday was over, he stood up slowly and mechanically walked towards the parking lot. He sat in his car for several minutes, trying to understand what was going on in his head, or perhaps his heart. He drove home to feed the children, pretending to listen to their stories about football, math lessons, the boy who pulled his pigtail, and the diorama of the Battle of Hastings. When they fell asleep, he habitually crept up to the boathouse. She stepped out from the shadow of the wall into the light. "I can't do this," she said. "It's like having a secret life that no one else can see. I can never be who I want to be, your wife and the mother of your children, and no one will see who I am inside or why this choice is important to me." He wrapped his arms around her gently as she cried. The next day, work was the same torture as before. When Sue returned from lunch, she found a flower pot on her desk, one purple flower peeking out from the tattered, sun-scorched leaves. Most women would probably think it was a mistake and throw the poor plant in the trash, but Sue knew her new lover's language. Instead, she went to a corner of the store, and in front of her colleagues, she replanted the flower, scattering soil on the table. Then she trimmed off the dried parts and watered the remaining ones. She put it in the light, cleaned up, and returned to her work. As Richard walked into the parking lot in the evening, aimlessly but slowly, knowing his children were waiting for him at home, he felt her presence before he saw her. "If you want to leave, I understand," he said, surprised at how much it sounded more like a growl than the gentle tone he had intended. She came out from behind the column. "It doesn't fit in my head," she said, "but in my heart, yes. I love you, Richard Thomas. But inside, I'm all torn to pieces." He hugged her, knowing that words could sometimes convey nothing but mush. He was sorry. He understood. He was afraid for her, and he felt crushed. The next day, he stopped at her desk an hour before lunch. Without a word, she followed him, and they got into the car. He drove carefully towards a rather shabby church at the far end of town. A good-natured man with graying hair and a cassock walked out of a door decorated with stained glass. "So, this is her," he said, spreading his arms. "She's everything I could have dreamed of. How are you, my dear?" Richard sat in the sanctuary, looking at the space behind the altar where generations had worshipped. Father Mueller poured her tea in his office, speaking quietly the entire time about Richard and the divorce a long time ago, about a family so broken that he set aside 2 plots in the cemetery. Then he talked about the man that young man became, fighting every step of the way, hiding it all from everyone except for accepting pain and drawing strength from it. "I don't know what to do," Sue said. "My heart is inclined to one side, and all my practical knowledge tells me that it is impossible." Father Mueller nodded slowly. "If you were on a deserted island thousands of miles away from everyone you know, with no hope of salvation, would you be with him?" "Of course," said Sue. "Then tell me," he said, "what do you think marriage really is?" Sue hesitated. "It's a lot of things. It's a bond for life, it's a promise, it's a legal contract, I guess, as well as a contract with God." He chuckled. "I don't know why they brought you here. I'm a terrible heretical priest. I spend most of my time reading Buddhist theories and old Greek literature. I don't agree with the idea that we show our faith to God by doing pious and charitable deeds and thus earn our place in heaven. I think we do this by making difficult decisions like this and doing what turns out to be best for everyone in the material world. Since God put us here for a purpose, and in my opinion, that is to develop souls through suffering, including such choices." The priest blew on his tea and continued, "They call my view sola fide or faith alone, which means that faith is not in charity but in right thinking. If your heart is pure and your mind is clear, you will do the right things here on earth, and that too will be right in heaven. We cannot show God our faith, but we must live it. This is the difference between love and a marriage ceremony. Life is random, and there is no plan, and how we deal with it shows what we are inside." He quoted, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from you, it is God's gift, not from works, so that no one can boast." Ephesians 2 verses 8 to 9. In other words, it's good to have religion, but when it replaces practical, realistic thinking, it's a mental illness, he said. "We can guess what heaven wants, but it is obvious that you two love each other very much and should be together. This creates a conflict between the ego, or your sense of self-worth as measured by others, and the ID, or your inner desire to not only love this man but to possess him. But the ego is associated with boasting, and the ID knows only true faith. Father Mueller took a sip of tea and continued, "This means that if in your heart you love this person forever, you are married in the eyes of God. I think you are already married, by the way, and the rest of humanity can shove their opinions aside. Besides, I have a few suggestions on how you can navigate this situation." Later, after thanking Father Mueller, she joined Richard in the sanctuary. They returned to the office together. Sue broke the silence. "You're right, he helped clear things up for me. It's my pain of not having a big white wedding where my family will finally see me as something more than a loser and all my friends will oh and ah, and I will finally feel like someone who made it." Time moved forward. The plant in her office grew, was replanted several times, and eventually became a small bush in the corner. Every night, Richard took care of his children, then went to his newly cozy boathouse. He bought her an emerald and diamond ring, made a new group of friends who knew her as his wife, and set up a business by purchasing the condominium where she lived with their rapidly growing family. That weekend, he and Robert went out on a boat looking for fish, as his son called it in his early childhood, causing endless jokes from his father and his fishing friends. "I never want to get married," said Robert. Richard chose his words carefully, as he often did, knowing that children remember every comment, casual or deliberate, from their parents often for a lifetime. When he interacted with his children, Richard understood that he was not just Richard but, first, a parent, a general or a dad, to his family, and he needed to do things right every time. "Marriage is the hardest thing I've ever done," Richard said. "This is also one of the best things I have ever done, if not the best. I got you as a result of this, and you are not many copies of me in my mind but your own people who bring the best of what your mother and I had." "But Mom is never home," said Robert. "It's like you're not married at all." "I love your mother and always will," Richard said. "She made some choices that, well, it's hard to predict how things will work out in the long run, made things difficult. I will always love her and forgive her, but her choices have consequences." Robert looked at the fishing line in the water. "Is that why you live in a house on a boat and Mrs. Sue comes over at night?" "You'll never fool them," Richard thought. "Yes," he said. "She's a good friend." "Will she become our mother?" asked Robert. "No," said Richard. "It's a little unusual, but I think most lives are like that. They're normal, and you have to deal with the difficulties that arise. She's my friend, and your mother is your mother. She will always be. We will be a family, but like your mother has her needs and desires, so do I." Robert thought about this for a while. "Okay," he finally said. "That makes sense, so now I have two moms?" Robert asked. "Yeah, basically," Richard replied, reeling in an empty can covered in seaweed on his hook. They both laughed and headed back along the canal to the house. Robert went to see his friends, and Richard returned to his little house on the water, the destroyed house behind him. "So, this is what you've been doing?" Karen began, approaching the boathouse. Richard was busy polishing that old sailboat, making progress on repairs. "It's nice that you're interested in what I do," Richard said, lighting his pipe to keep it lit while applying another coat of oil to the wood drying in the sun. "This boat has been rotting in a barn for many years and always had some, how should I say, internal flaws. I threw out the parts that were never meant for it and replaced them with new wood." "I signed the document," she said, throwing it toward him. "My lawyer, Rulo, said it was pretty standard and a good way to protect our money, but I thought the corporate liability clause was strange. What about us donating 10% of profits to the Arboretum?" Richard was surprised but kept his gaze steady. In such moments, his eyes regained the sparkle they had before he learned of her infidelity. "No," he replied, "about the point of morality, and even more about the need for contribution." Karen continued, "It seems like you're hijacking my salary." "The trust only works if we put our entire fortune into it," Richard explained. "I put everything I earn into it, just like I did with this marriage. That's why I signed it. But I asked Rudolph to add a clause that any personal purchases I made would come from my earnings before making the deposit," Karen insisted. Richard thought about it. "If the same applies to me, I agree," he said. So we're equals in everything. He had anticipated her demand after all. Okay, she said as she left. Just put your initials on the changes. She congratulated herself on yet another successful business meeting, but in the back of her mind was the thought that Richard was, after all, a professional negotiator. Richard released a steady stream of green into the grass and then stood hesitantly to grab the hose. 10 years passed since Suzanne left for college with the intention of studying compiler design and machine learning. Richard felt a great sense of pride. All 4 of his children went on interesting paths. Robert, to his surprise, joined the Marine Corps and set out to obtain professional certifications in HVAC to manage networked systems for warehouse climate control. Kyo received a scholarship to a private college, and Daniel opened his own plumbing business for luxury homes and corporate rentals, making more money than he knew what to do with. One sunny day, Suzanne was starting high school when Karen rushed toward the boathouse in a rage. She stopped to knock on the double doors, finding them unlocked. Clutching a thin folder in her hands, she gasped, "What in God's name?" Someone had replaced the old, creaky boards with new ones that had grooves for joints and covered everything with drywall. It had a small bathroom, albeit with a composting toilet, and wiring for electricity. There was an office nook, a kitchen, a nook for a bed in a former loft, and the coziest men's corner she'd ever seen, with leather sofas angled toward the TV. The full-size refrigerator she checked was filled with meat, beer, and the occasional vegetable, which was probably suffering from self-esteem issues. Did he party here? It looks like it, Karen thought, feeling a moment of abandonment. The irreparability affected her self-esteem. She was no longer important to her husband. When she noticed women's clothing, bras and panties, in the dresser next to the corner bed, she instantly knew she had been replaced. Even more, this small space, the size of a 2-car garage, seemed cozier and more welcoming than their house had been in many years. He even framed the drawings each child had made at school and had photographs of her and the children on outings she didn't remember being invited to. There was a quote on the wall, "I advise you to be careful, although never fearful. Be very careful with what you drink, with other men's women, and with the third thing, with men and their temptation to steal." She heard the boat motor pull up to the dock and her husband got out, then walked along the boards of the dock that sounded new instead of the faded, rotten boards that had been there for years. "Oh, hi," he said as he walked through the door. "So, do you like the place?" "Very beautiful," Karen said dreamily, then snapped back to reality. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, shoving the folder in his face. "Adoption papers for your secretary's children?" "No, Sue is my vice president, not my secretary," Richard said slowly, trying to make his next statement as gentle as possible. "They are also my children, but now they will bear my last name and become part of our family so they can have their share of the trust." "You had kids with that woman?" "What the hell?" Karen stopped mid-sentence. "Exactly," said Richard. "You left me, so life went on without you," Karen said, snorting. "I want." But she fell silent again. He handed her the card between his first 2 fingers. "We have a meeting scheduled for this Wednesday." Richard turned to the table, taking everything out of his pockets, and remained there until he heard her high heels stopping away and then running toward the house on the lake. Night fell slowly, as always, and the fireflies came out to play in the long grass, far enough from the noise of the roads to survive. A few days later, Richard found himself driving to a large house in the city center. It had once been a family home, but like many organic things, it had been replaced by commerce and the inexorable march of progress that Richard no longer trusted himself to define. Now, it was an office where a consultant rented space. "I am Dr. Rul Winslow, and we are here with Mr. Richard Thomas and his wife, Mrs. Karen Thomas. This is being recorded for the protection of my clients and, myself." There was a knock on the door, and Richard opened it. "I'm Nick Randall, Mr. Thomas's lawyer," said a tall man in a smart suit. "I'm here at the request of my client to protect his interests and explain some of the things that are happening here." Karen looked back at the other 3 in the room. She chose Dr. Winslow, a Catholic traditionalist with feminist leanings, because of his record in protecting women by supporting men's commitment to marriage and reconciliation at all costs. The psychiatrist looked confused. "Karen is here," Richard began slowly, then changed course. My wife discovered that I have been living with another woman in our backyard for the last 10 years and have 3 children. Holy cow, Dr. Winslow said, then regained his professional composure. And you didn't tell her about it? Because she was busy and didn't notice, Richard said. His lawyer, Nick, began handing out copies of photographs taken outside the motels, each with a date and time. There were quite a lot of them. Did you know this whole time? Karen asked in disbelief. Richard gave her a look of pity. When you love someone, you know their mood. You even know when they stop loving you and only keep you around to finance the house and children. Nick spoke quietly. After discovering the affair, my client placed his and his wife's income and retirement portfolios into a trust to protect them from events of this nature. On page 3 of the agreement is a morality clause stating that any party to the agreement who engages in publicly disgraceful activities loses his share and receives only a nominal payment of $225,000 per year. Dr. Winslow looked puzzled. But if you knew about the affair? Nick replied, he knew she did it once, not that she would do it again. When she repeated the process, my client admitted that his wife had lost her share and, even more, that she had broken the covenant behind the trust as she continued to live in the house and spend the income from his earnings on personal needs. He handed over a piece of paper documenting many purchases. My client admitted that in fact she intended for the contract to remain in force with the exception of the marital fidelity clause. He took a deep breath. This gives my client the legal right to seek a similar partnership for himself, and he began a relationship with Miss Sue Scott, with whom, as mentioned, he has 3 children. He is now seeking Mrs. Thomas to agree to their adoption so they can bear his surname and be considered children of the lawful marriage in the eyes of the state. His decision to create the trust turned out to be prudent because we have reliable information that Mrs. Thomas and Mr. Sheen used company funds to carry out their long-term affair. Dr. Winslow turned pale, as this was not going at all as he had expected. Like most psychiatrists, he knew little more than his textbooks had taught him, even if he considered most of it clever talk. After all, more than a century of psychotherapy had led to more mental illness in society as a whole, not less, but he would never say that to his clients. Let's take a step back, he said in a voice usually reserved for kindergarten children. Richard, did you notice that your wife was cheating on you? Instead of trying to resolve it, you took revenge? No, doctor, Richard said. I tried several times to talk my wife out of infidelity. I updated my wardrobe, tried to take her out to fancy restaurants, and got massages, but nothing worked. Despite my supposedly legendary communication skills, when it became clear that the affair was not a one-time thing but a permanent replacement for me in the role of spouse, I considered this part of the agreement void for myself and found my replacement for the absence of my unaffectionate wife. Nick spoke again. During this time, my client documented the process of leaving Mrs. Thomas. He purchased replacements for his toiletries, clothing, and personal items, then renovated the boathouse to make it a second home, after which he only visited the main house to cook, clean, and read to the children. And communicating with them, Nick handed Dr. Winslow another piece of paper. This is a copy of my client's application for a second address for the boathouse, establishing that it was a second residence. Mrs. Thomas apparently did not notice or care that he no longer received any mail at the main house, nor that his items never changed location. I also have a photo of his toiletries with different expiration dates from almost 10 years ago. We're getting ahead of ourselves, Dr. Winslow said. Karen, you need your lawyer to look at this document. However, we are here for marriage counseling. Is there any way you two could resolve the situation, like having a nice dinner together? I can't, Richard said. Can or won't? Dr. Winslow asked. I can't. I have a weird stomach problem where, when I'm around her, I vomit constantly and violently. It's debilitating, and the meds to suppress it make me feel disgusting for days. They seem to be hard on the liver. What about meeting outside the house? Winslow continued, desperately trying to find a way out while still billing for the full session. He also had a sailboat, and as they say, boats are holes in the water into which large sums of money are thrown. How about a vacation somewhere tropical? Richard thought for a moment. If I take a leave, will you sign the adoption papers? He nodded to Nick, who, like a professional, didn't let his smile show on his face. Yes, said Karen. Then we agree, said Richard. True to her word, Karen signed and notarized the paperwork and the adoption process, encouraged by Sue Scott, who understood the complexities of Richard and his situation, began its slow grind through the creaking gears of an expensive but mysteriously underfunded bureaucracy. Richard left the plane ticket under her pillow. He thought about putting away all the old expired toiletries and clothes, many of which hung loosely on his frame but constricted his newly large biceps and calves. But he shrugged. Instead, he went to the pier and lowered the boat onto the canal. Karen found the ticket later and smiled. Maybe this will all work out. She can have it all at once. When she got to the airport in the morning 2 days later, Richard was nowhere to be seen. Confused, she went through security with only a cursory examination of her body cavities and took a seat near the exit. The hours passed, and when the flight began to board, she started to get nervous. Standing up, she turned around. "Jab," she said. "It's so nice to meet you here, Karen," he asked. She looked down and noticed that he was holding an identical ticket. "I found it on my desk," he said. "I thought you wanted to finally take that vacation we've always talked about." Karen smiled warmly. "Let's go," she said. To hell with Richard and his little games, she thought. She'll make Rulo deal with him when she returns. Holding hands, they boarded the plane. The fish weren't biting on the canal, so Richard went back and changed his clothes. He called Nick throughout the day. Calls were made to clients whose list Karen had carelessly left on her laptop. Each call went like this. "Lawyer, legal department, how can I help?" "Nick here. This is Nick Randall from Malher and Rankin. I'm calling about our upcoming litigation against the advertising firm where Jeb Sheen works, and I'm wondering whether your firm was aware of an ongoing affair between Mr. Sheen and his subordinate, Karen Thomas, in which we intend to investigate allegations of misuse of client funds. Were you aware of the extramarital affairs between these two, and did you ever notice any accounting discrepancies in their accounts?" "Lawyer, I have to find out. We will contact you." He didn't receive a single call back, but the message was delivered. Later, at the end of the day, Nick and Richard found themselves in front of the board of directors of Jeb's advertising firm. Nick started, "It has come to our attention that Mr. Sheen has been engaged in an affair with his subordinate, Karen Thomas, for over 10 years. We have found documentation on Mrs. Thomas's computer that suggests there may have been mixed means, if not the direct use of company funds to finance this affair, including luxury weekend trips. We intend to file a claim for damages to Mr. Thomas's business caused by the revelation of this affair and the subsequent loss of trust that led to potential clients avoiding the firm. With testimony from witnesses, according to several accounts, Mr. Sheen and Mrs. Thomas conducted this affair openly in the office, which we can only assume the firm, and therefore the board of directors, agreed to. We are wondering if you have an initial settlement offer." As he said this, the secretary entered the room and whispered in the ear of the chairman of the board of directors. Richard could only assume that this was yet another client who had called off, as everyone involved was trying to escape the legal storm of steel and feces that was fast approaching them. The chairman turned white, then red. "We'll get back to you," he said. Richard and Nick let them walk out the door. "Message delivered," Nick said when they were out of earshot. 2 weeks later, when Karen returned home, she was in a bad mood. On the second day in Tahiti, emails from their legal department arrived, reprimanding her and Jeb. No one lost their jobs, but it was also clear that their careers would go nowhere after this failure. By decision of the board of directors, Jeb was no longer in charge of his own company. Jeb raged and ruined the rest of the vacation, calling lawyers and grumbling about how they couldn't do this to him. He then called his wife to explain himself while Karen went to the beach with a cocktail. "Keep serving," she told the cabana guy, handing him a 50. As soon as the plane landed, Jeb disappeared. Karen never saw him outside of work again. The next morning, Nick and Richard, wearing matching suits, ran into Jeb and his lawyer. "We intend to file a legal suit regarding the allegations made against my client," the lawyer began. "Great," Nick said. "And what's more?" "What?" asked the lawyer. "You're new to this," Nick replied. "I've been doing this for decades. You sue us, we get the right to discovery. First, we need Mr. Sheen's schedule, his expense reports for all business travel on the dates we specify, and access to interviews with all employees who could have heard Mrs. Thomas and Mr. Sheen discussing the affair in the office. The lawyer turned pale. We will contact you. Meanwhile, Karen was looking for work but discovered that every advertising firm in North America had received a letter of solicitation asking about the details of her affair with Mr. Sheen and the possibility of commingling funds or using company resources to finance their meetings in Las Vegas, Paris, New York, and Atlantic City. Unsurprisingly, no one was willing to hire her for any position above cleaning, and that was only if she took a rigorous ethics course, which she would have to fund herself. Richard walked easily through the house and handed her a check. That's your $25,000 for the year, he said. The house is free, and the children are supervised. Please. After recovering from her shock, Karen followed him down to the boathouse with a determined expression. I never thought you were so immature, she said. Are you destroying me instead of trying to work it out like adults? I tried, Richard said quietly, tying up the boat. You may remember I spent a lot of time trying. You didn't want to listen. So are you ruining my life? Richard threw the rope aside. Let me tell you something, Karen. On our wedding day, I looked into your eyes and saw the path to happiness, love, family, work, support to pay for it all, a lake house, retirement, and traveling the world, then spending golden years in satisfaction and joy visiting grandchildren and spoiling them. This was what I wanted. He continued, this is everything you can never have through your own fault. You treated me like a servant or one of your office subordinates. You threw away our love, and with it, our future. There are an infinite number of ways to betray your spouse, but the worst of them is contempt. You treated me like an enemy. All I did was tell the truth so that the world would know that I am not a cuckold, a man who will take it lying down. Their eyes met for a moment. Karen realized that she had never really trusted him because who could trust a reckless animal that no woman could control? Richard saw years of crying children frightened by the breakdown of their family and the confidence with which Karen ruled as a tyrant empowered by her career. Anger flared for a moment. To hell with it, he thought. To hell with Hitler and to hell with Stalin too, and to hell with everyone who lied for power, including every American leader since March 16, 1861. Richard sighed and lit his pipe. I'm not a martyr, Karen. As a wise man once said, there was only one true Christian, and he died on the cross. I may be Siddhartha under the Bodhi tree or Odin hanging upside down with an eye missing. I am the one who learns from my mistakes. Your actions deprived me of what I wanted, so I looked elsewhere. But I refused to divorce you because our children, the products of our love, deserve a whole family in the knowledge that they were not a mistake, even though your actions signaled to them that I was a mistake and therefore so was their creation. As if on cue, a bright white sailboat, much larger than his small boat, approached the dock. Sue waved, surrounded by her children. I forgot to tell you, Karen, but you never asked. We're retired. Sue now runs her own consulting firm, and I do consulting too. Since you didn't want to wait to travel the world, I'll go with her and the kids, and we'll have a great time, all time paid for by the trust. But this is not revenge, this is simply getting your life back after betrayal. Richard took a deep breath. I forgive you, he said. I have no resentment, no hatred, no anger towards you. I just don't care. I forgave you, gave up on you, and shut down. Despite all your attempts to become what you thought was important, you became unimportant, and your ethical violations are your own problem. He stood up and walked towards the sunset, surrounded by water swelling with summer rain.
You've heard the first story, so let's get to the second.
After catching his unfaithful wife in the act, a husband decides to do inexplicable things. In today's story, a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. In the restaurant, the song for you was playing softly, and Rachel and I were leisurely moving to the simple beat, enjoying a pleasant evening. We were invited there by our friends who decided to throw a 70s style party in honor of their anniversary. There weren't many guests, mostly close friends and family. Josh and Linda were celebrating 10 years of their life together, and they had come up with this style of celebration. Many, especially their parents and older folks, even enjoyed the idea, as it allowed them to briefly reminisce about their youthful years. For us, it was just a diverse evening with its own quirks and charms. After the dance, we returned to our table, and one of the guests decided to stand out and propose a toast to the event's main characters. While he was giving his speech, we pretended to listen attentively, though in reality, we were more focused on the snacks and the decorations, and the overall atmosphere. Then the music started again, but hardly anyone was dancing. It seemed like the guests had decided to replenish their internal energy supplies and stayed at their tables to drink and snack. I decided to step outside to have a smoke and maybe eavesdrop on what others were talking about. Almost everyone here knew each other, and those who also went outside quickly found common ground and chatted about various topics. I, for the time being, stayed on the sidelines and simply observed. The fresh air was invigorating, and I actually enjoyed being alone for a while. However, my solitary moment didn't last long. In just a few minutes, a tall man with long sideburns and thin mustache approached me. "Good evening," he greeted. "Hello," I replied, and I noticed how he carefully assessed me, or more precisely, my appearance, even though I looked quite ordinary for a party. "Oh, I see you don't know me," he continued. "Not many people here do. I recently moved to the city, and I'm Josh's nephew, Anthony Gross." "Well, Anthony, nice to meet you," I replied, extending a polite hand for a handshake. "You can call me Patrick." Anthony shook my hand, and I became curious about what might have piqued his interest in me, or perhaps he just wanted to get to know everyone at the party. "And you?" he began to ask slowly. "I'm just a friend of Josh and Linda." "Did you come from far away?" "I noticed your accent." "Yes, I've lived in England for a long time, and then I had to move to Spain for work, where I've been living for the past 3 years. And now, here we are in California." "Oh, I couldn't help but notice your beautiful companion." "Is she your wife, I assume?" "You're right, she's my wife," I said. I found it a bit strange and suspicious that he was so interested in my wife. Could this self-absorbed guy be trying to make a move on her, and was his question an attempt to gather some information? I was about to ask him about his job to steer the conversation away from my wife when he seemed to read my thoughts and gracefully wrapped up the conversation. "Oh, it seems I'm being called," he said, looking through the large windows of the building at one of the tables. "Well, we'll see each other again," he added and walked back inside. I finished my cigarette and followed him back into the venue. I wanted to observe this peculiar individual a bit more, who had somehow entered my life in such a strange way. As I walked back to our table, I tried to spot Anthony, but he had vanished as if he had evaporated, which I actually found pleasant, as my initial impression of him was not entirely positive. "Is something wrong?" My wife noticed my unease. "What?" "No, everything's fine." "Didn't you miss?" "Without me?" "No, I didn't have a chance." "You came back so quickly." I got up and decided to go look for Josh. His nephew had firmly occupied my mind, and I wanted to learn more about him. I found my friend sitting at one of the distant tables, engrossed in a conversation with a sweet old lady. "Josh, could you take a break?" "I wanted to talk to you," I interrupted him. "Yes, Patrick. Right now." "Just a minute." "Excuse me, Mrs. Choice, we'll discuss your poodle later." He bid farewell to the old lady and gestured for me to step aside. "You came just in time." Her complaints about her dog were starting to get to me. "What's on your mind?" "Well, nothing really. I recently met your nephew. He mentioned that he just arrived." "Oh, yes. That's right. We haven't seen him in years. He's grown quite a bit. I noticed he has a unique style." "Yes, you're right. When he came here, I didn't recognize him right away. He's even changed his character. Being a valet has taken a bit of a toll on his character," explained Josh. "What? A valet?" I couldn't help but chuckle. "Yes. Why? What's wrong with that?" "Nothing, it's just that he spoke as if you were some kind of military or diplomatic personnel." "Never mind. I probably just made some incorrect assumptions. Is he back for good, or just visiting?" "He told us he's here temporarily, until he finds another job. We've even assigned him a room because he has no one else in the city." You remember my sister and her husband died in a car accident a few years ago. Yes. That's something no one would wish for. Let's not talk about the sad stuff. You tell me. How was your evening? I think it went really well. I really wanted to book a band to do all the songs. But then I decided their voices weren't gonna replace the original singers, so I went with the jukebox. You're right. The evening is wonderful. Oh, isn't that Linda looking for you? I spotted her wandering among the guests, looking for someone. Maybe she's looking for me. I'll go find out what she needs. Josh went over to his wife, and I decided to return to my table. For some reason, I didn't want to leave my wife alone for too long this evening. As I approached our table, I saw that amusing man again, but this time he was sitting next to Rachel, whispering something in her ear, and she, seemingly enchanted, was listening to him, paying no attention to anyone else. You again. I turned to him. Will you leave us? I demanded of him rather than asked. Oh, Patrick, we meet again. Your wife is just lovely. You're so lucky. He replied. I can handle it myself. They're waiting for you there. I was starting to feel his insolence taking over, and I was getting sick of it. Anthony looked at me, and I noticed a sense of hurt and indignation in his gaze, as if I had taken something valuable away from him. Yes. I'm leaving, he tried to restrain his emotions. Nice talking to you, Rachel. Then he took her hand and kissed her knuckles. At that moment, I had an inexplicable urge to hit those lips so hard that he would know his place. However, I understood that my jealousy was flaring up, even though there was no real reason for it. But I still felt extremely uncomfortable seeing him next to my wife. Anthony walked away, and I took my seat at the table. Why were you so rude? He just came over to say hello. He's a pretty nice young man. He told me he's an orphan. Poor thing. Going through all that. You shouldn't be so aggressive towards him. My wife said. I wasn't being aggressive. I just don't like everyone licking your hands. But still. What? I asked rather abruptly. Well, never mind. She replied, showing that my tone had hurt her. Something had gone wrong at that moment, I realized, and I blamed it on Anthony, who seemed determined to invade our family, and it pissed me off. But I didn't want to ruin my friend's evening with it, so I decided to pull myself together and forget the unpleasant feeling. He's just strange. I don't want him hovering around you. Especially since he was working as a simple servant somewhere overseas. So what? So the man was unlucky enough to get a fancy job. So what now? Should we sue him? Since when did you become such a? Like what? Well, like this. Why are you even picking on him? I myself didn't know why this man had bothered me, but something about him definitely didn't sit right with me. I apologized to my wife for my absurd behavior since I wanted to enjoy the evening without arguments, which had become more frequent between us recently. We continued to have fun, socializing with other guests, and Anthony no longer bothered us. I had completely lost sight of him, but that even made me happy. When I returned home, Rachel and I got into an unpleasant conversation. She reminded me of my tactless behavior towards Anthony. It seemed like she was defending him, even though she didn't know anything about him. My feelings of jealousy resurfaced, and I expressed my dissatisfaction, which led to an argument. Once again, she tried to paint me as a selfish person only concerned with my own interests. Not wanting to continue our quarrel, I decided to leave and headed to a 24-hour bar, hoping that by the time I got home, Rachel would have calmed down and stopped pestering me for no reason. As I sat at the bar, sipping my drink, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was constantly watching me. I turned around a few times but didn't see anyone who could be spying on me. All the people present were busy with their own activities, emptying their glasses and shot glasses. About an hour later, when I was tired of sitting in a drinking establishment and was about to leave, I thought I caught a glimpse of Anthony standing in a dark corner. I turned and looked closer. But he wasn't there, just some dude on the phone. I was so excited, I went home, trying to forget the haunting ghost I'd conjured up for myself. The next day, I contacted Josh and asked if he could meet with me. When he agreed, I arranged to meet him at the same pub I had visited the previous night. In the evening, I shared my unpleasant feelings with him and explained how I had argued with my wife because of it. However, Josh assured me that Anthony had been at their house the entire evening after the party and hadn't gone out. Yeah, you're right. I probably just imagined it. Jealousy, alcohol, and everything mixed together took their toll. I just can't shake the feeling that someone has entered Rachel's life. Someone other than me. And I don't know what to do about it, I confessed. Relax, my friend. You're just tired. When was the last time you had a vacation? And your wife is just stunning, that's why you're jealous of everyone who pays attention to her. Has she ever given you a reason to doubt her? He tried to comfort me. No, she hasn't. I just am the way I am. I don't know what I would do if I found out she wanted to cheat on me. Why did you even think that she might be seeing someone else? I don't know. It's just a feeling. And we've been arguing a lot lately. Oh, well, that's not a reason. Many couples argue. Linda and I have our share of disagreements from time to time. It's normal. I wanted to believe Josh, and his words made sense. At some point, I accepted his advice to relax and stop overthinking things. I left our meeting with a calm mind and a clear conscience. Josh always knew how to support and calm me down. I returned home in high spirits, even willing to apologize to my wife for my jealousy outburst. When I entered the house, I noticed Rachel in a cheerful mood. She was sitting in the living room on the couch, listening to classical music, probably Beethoven. Oh, you're back already? That's great. Will you be having dinner? She asked. I'm not very hungry right now, actually. Maybe later. Did you decide to have a little celebration? I noticed a bouquet of flowers in a vase on the table. Oh, no. I'm just relaxing. This music is unexpectedly pleasant to the ears. It's even somewhat inspiring. Anthony gave me some advice on how to enjoy my evening. Hearing that name, which I never expected to hear from my wife again, sent me spiraling back into a fit of hysteria. What? Anthony? When did he have time to give you advice? I demanded. I ran into him by pure chance today at the store. He invited me to have a cup of coffee with him, and we got to talking. You shouldn't have been so hard on him yesterday. He's very well-mannered and polite. She replied. What? Coffee with him? And did he give you those flowers too? I snatched the bouquet and vase, then hurled them against the wall. How long will this scoundrel keep pestering us? Hey, what are you doing? Rachel yelled. Have you gone completely mad? Oh, you... I jumped up and leaned over her, feeling a lot of anger at the fact that she was dating him. Are you out of your mind? What are you freaking out about? She got up from the couch, not letting me catch myself. Since when is drinking coffee with a friend a crime? I sat back down on the couch, trying to regain control over my emotions. Maybe I had indeed overreacted, and she was innocent? I'm sorry. I don't even know what got into me. I tried to rectify the situation. Fool. What did he ever do to you to make you hate him so much? Are you jealous of Josh, too? Even though you know I've seen him and Linda at the coffee shop more than once. You should see a psychiatrist. You've gone crazy. Rachel went into the kitchen and banged on something in the cabinets. She came back almost immediately, broom and dustpan in hand, and went to the shards to clean up the mess I'd made. I sat on the couch and watched her pick up the shards. I knew I had done wrong to her, and it was all my stupid jealousy that was to blame. But I couldn't help it when she flared up. That was just the way I was, and she'd known it when she'd married me 8 years ago. But, before, I had always tried to keep my emotions in check and not give in to them. Besides, Rachel had never given me a reason to doubt her. Maybe Josh was right when he said that I had just been exhausted lately and needed to relax. But why couldn't I shake the feeling that something was different in our relationship now? Sometimes it seemed like Rachel was deliberately provoking me. Or was she doing it to hide a secret relationship with another man, one I knew nothing about? I approached my wife, offering to help with the cleanup. I hoped that a bit of shared tidying up would help us reconcile and ease my suspicions. I started picking up the glass shards, but it seemed that Rachel didn't want me to help. "Leave it. You've already helped," she said dryly. "I just want to." "Ouch!" she exclaimed, hurting herself with the splinter we had managed to take together. She looked at the thin puncture on the fingertip bundle, from which blood oozed, and then she took her finger in her mouth like a child and looked at me reproachfully. "Did you hurt yourself?" "Let me see," I worriedly said. "Leave me alone." She snorted, and leaving everything behind she got up and headed into the kitchen to the sink to wash the wound, then went to the cabinet for a Band-Aid. "Hey, come on." I'm concerned. I caught up with her in the kitchen as she was rummaging through the first aid kit. "Why are you acting this way? Just tell me, is there someone else in your life?" "What?" She paused, momentarily distracted from her task. "What nonsense are you spewing?" "Rachel, I just want to know. You've been acting different lately. Always going somewhere, often in a bad mood." "Me in a bad mood? Have a look at yourself. You're jealous of me every chance you get. You've gone crazy. What made you even think that?" I sat down on a stool facing her. "Just tell me." I stared at her as if trying to penetrate her with my gaze. "No, there's no one else in my life." "Satisfied now?" "You're just paranoid." "Sometimes, I regret marrying you." Rachel's response did calm me down, although her last remark was hurtful. Why did she say that? I hadn't done anything wrong. I just loved her deeply and didn't want to share her with anyone else. I walked over to her and took the Band-Aid from her hand, indicating my willingness to help. Rachel didn't resist, and I applied the adhesive strip to her finger. During this time, we both remained silent. She then quietly returned to finish cleaning the living room. I sat in the kitchen for a while, reminiscing about those early days when Rachel and I had just started dating. Everything had been incredible back then, and our feelings for each other seemed unshakable. Even the first few years of our marriage were blissful, untainted by any issues. I tried to imagine in my mind the moment when our relationship wasn't as strong as it used to be. Yet, I couldn't pinpoint what might have affected her feelings towards me. Rachel returned to the kitchen with the cleaning supplies, and after tossing out the trash, spoke to me in her previous calm tone. "How long are you going to sit here?" "You said you didn't want to eat," she asked. "Am I in your way?" I inquired. "No, just asking. I'm going to relax." "When you've had enough sitting, join me," she replied and left. I stayed there for a while, thinking about it. And without coming to any conclusion, I went to rest, too. I wanted to believe what she said, what she told me. I still loved her, no matter what, and it was important to me to keep my family together. The next few days passed relatively quietly. I continued to go to work, and Rachel continued with her painting. She drew pictures and portraits. And lately, she'd been drawing illustrations for children's books. She even got a job at one of the publications, and she loved the work, which was flexible and paid well. Then Josh called me and asked if they could come over for the weekend. I didn't mind at all. On the contrary, I was always happy to see him and Linda at our house. I'd just forgotten that his nephew was still visiting. And on the day of his visit to us, they decided to take him with them. "I hope you don't mind. We brought our relative along," Josh told me as he walked through the door. At first, I wanted to object, remembering my unfavorable impression of Anthony after our initial encounter. However, I hoped Josh had briefed him about certain boundaries concerning my wife, and that Anthony wouldn't act as if he was courting Rachel. "Of course, come in. We can't just leave him outside," I quipped. "You haven't visited us for a while." "I see you've repainted the living room," Josh observed as he looked around. "Oh, no, Rachel decided to change the interior a bit." "I just forgot to mention it," I replied. "She's been at it for the past couple of weeks." "Yeah, it's nice. Really cozy," Linda added as she entered the room. "And where's Rachel?" "I don't see her." "She went to the store," I said. "I told her you were coming, so she decided to get a cake and some wine." "That's commendable," Josh said. "Then we'll wait for her. Anthony, please, come in. Don't be shy." I watched this man, who strode leisurely through my house and looked at everything around him like a museum exhibit. Without his tuxedo, in a simple jacket and pants, he looked like an ordinary guy who had come to the city from the country for the first time. And I even now vaguely believed that he had been to other countries, where the houses and interiors were much different from mine, and a man with his history, in my opinion, should have behaved somewhat differently. "Would you like something to drink for now?" I asked Josh and Linda. "I have lemonade, cola, and beer." "Lemonade would be great." "Right, Josh?" Linda commanded. Josh nodded in agreement. "And your nephew? Is he gonna do anything? I've noticed he's been very quiet today." I asked Josh. "Hey, Anthony. What do you want?" "Coke or lemonade?" shouted Josh to him. "Doesn't matter." "I like both," he replied, continuing to survey the surroundings. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, still glancing at Anthony as I went. It was like I was trying to see something in him, even though I didn't know what it was yet. When I got the drinks, I set the tray on the table and wanted to sit down in my favorite chair. But as soon as I thought of doing that, Anthony immediately placed his fifth place there. "Anthony. That's my chair. Move to the other one." In the quite insolent tone of a landlord, I said. The guy at first apparently didn't understand what was expected of him and looked at us as if he were mentally asking Josh what to do. "Anthony. If you be so kind. Move over." Josh told him. "I'm sorry, Patrick." He didn't know, he later explained to me. "I understand," I said, looking at the little rascal, trying to maintain composure because his childlike innocence was starting to bother me for some reason. Rachel was running late, but Josh and Linda kept me entertained. Josh told jokes that made Anthony laugh uncontrollably, and he shared some stories and news he had learned in the last few days. Linda watched over Anthony more closely. Sometimes, it seemed to me like she cared for him as if he were her son, although it was none of my business. But on that day, I sensed that something had changed since the last time I saw them, and they both seemed like they were hiding something. About an hour later, my wife arrived. She greeted everyone quickly and went straight to the kitchen with a bag. I went to her to help and share my new impressions. "So, you're coming up with something again?" she objected. "Oh, what a fantasizer you are. You should only write books. What's so strange about him? I'd be curious in someone else's house too. It's perfectly normal. Perfectly normal." Lately, I had been hearing these words quite frequently, as if everyone were trying to convince me that it was the case. Whatever happened, people always said, "It's perfectly normal." Even at work, when the courier was late with deliveries, the secretary would say, "It's perfectly normal, there might be traffic outside." But this wasn't about work. It was about how these words seemed to haunt me recently. "Rachel, you'll notice it yourself after some time. I still don't trust this guy. And why did he leave his job if it was so good for him there?" I continued to instill suspicion in her. "How would I know? You could ask him yourself. And maybe he has a visa issue or his contract ended. That's normal. Enough with that damn phrase." I couldn't take it anymore and shouted. My wife looked at me with horror. But I could see from her expression that she was tense and hiding something. I really wanted to know the truth. So I decided to find out right away. My outburst caught the attention of the guests. Josh, being a caring friend, hurried to find out what was happening and joined us in the kitchen. "Hey, is everything okay with you guys?" "Patrick, why are you making a scene?" He tried to make a joke, but I was in no mood for it. "Nothing," I replied more calmly. "It's just that today hasn't gone well." "Josh, everything's fine. Go on." "Patrick, you too, go. I'll slice the cake now and join you." "Oh, Patrick." She continued as I turned to leave, pointing to a bottle of wine. "Could you open that?" I got the corkscrew out of the drawer, Josh helped me with the glasses, and we headed into the living room. It didn't take long for Rachel to arrive, and soon we were having a good time at the table. I went out on the porch from time to time for a smoke, choosing not to go out at the same time as Anthony. And though everyone tried to convince me that he was very sweet and good-natured, I still disliked him for some reason. If I could, I'd never see him again. Our weekend dragged on into the evening. After sitting around the table and drinking a bottle of wine, the company demanded to continue the fun, and this time I was sent to the store to get wine. I quickly ran to the nearest store, so that I could spend less time away from home and not leave my wife and Anthony to socialize without me. When I returned, we decided to continue the fun in our backyard. After 2 glasses, Anthony became more relaxed, and it seemed like he was a different person again. He started presenting himself as a true gentleman once more and even attempted to tell some jokes, which in my opinion, weren't funny and a bit silly. But Josh and Linda supported their relative and burst into laughter, pretending to find his jokes genuinely amusing. Rachel, trying to show herself as a hospitable host, also joined in, and to be honest, it infuriated me. "Oh, it seems we're running out of alcohol," Josh remarked. "Yeah, and it's getting late," I hinted that it was time for the guests to leave. By that point, everyone was quite tipsy and a bit tired. Josh realized it was time to wrap up the evening and suggested they go. "Patrick, do you have a regular phone?" "We left our mobiles at home, and I'd like to call a taxi," he asked. "Yes, of course. It's in the kitchen." "Go ahead," I replied. Josh headed towards the house, and I continued to keep an eye on the slightly drunk Anthony to ensure he wouldn't get too close to my wife. "Oh, Rachel, you're such a wonderful hostess," he said it politely, looking at her, but occasionally glancing at me, as if trying to anticipate my actions. But I sat back in my chair and tried to be calm, even though I could feel something inside me starting to stir again, and it wasn't a good feeling. I could hardly wait for Josh to return and tell me they were leaving. As we saw them off, Anthony gave me a strange look, similar to how psychopaths look in movies. But I tried not to attach too much significance to it because they were already leaving, and I was beginning to feel relief. Rachel went to clear the table, and I settled down on the couch, wanting to be quiet for a while. But a knock on the door interrupted my intentions, and I went to open it, muttering to myself. Josh was at the door, and I was a little surprised to see him again. After all, they were already pulling away when I closed the door. I looked behind him and saw a cab car waiting for him, and Anthony was looking out the window, staring at me intently. "I think Anthony left his jacket on your porch." "Can I go get it?" he asked, standing at the doorstep and waiting for me to let him in. "Oh, yes, of course." "Go ahead," I replied and took a step to the side to let him in. Josh headed towards the back exit, and for a few seconds, I continued to look at Anthony, who never took his eyes off me. Then I closed the door and was about to return to the living room. However, I heard a strange whisper in the kitchen, which made me decide to check what was happening there. As I entered, Josh and Rachel, as if they had pushed each other away, stared at me with a frightened look. "Did I interrupt something?" I asked sarcastically. "No," my wife replied. "We were just chatting." "Yes, I was asking if Rachel had seen Anthony's jacket," Josh explained, as if justifying himself. Initially, I thought it might be the case, but then I noticed that Rachel's clothes were slightly disheveled, and she appeared noticeably nervous. Dark thoughts began to crawl back into my mind. However, I couldn't have imagined that there could be anything more between these two than just friendship. "Why don't you tell me what you've really been doing here?" I started approaching them. Rachel stepped back, and Josh decided to assume a defensive posture. "Patrick, what are you talking about?" "I just told you, I was simply asking." He didn't get a chance to finish, because I slapped him across the muzzle without even waiting for an explanation. Somehow I was pretty sure they'd been hugging the moment I'd walked into the kitchen, and their looks and demeanor confirmed it. "What are you doing?" "Patrick? Are you crazy?" he continued. But I didn't want to stop. I was sure that he was the one my wife had been cheating on me with, and I had finally caught them. Now I could unleash all my pent-up negative energy on him and punish the idiot for his treacherous actions behind my back. "You an idiot!" I yelled at him, continuing to swing my fists. "How could you touch my wife? You were my friend, a close friend. I trusted you." Josh tried to defend himself, but he wasn't much of a fighter, and I had the upper hand. Plus, my anger, fueled by his betrayal, gave me strength. We tumbled to the floor, and I continued to pummel him. Just then, my wife's voice came from behind. "Idiot, what are you doing? That's not him." After those words, I felt a blow to the back of my head. A strong blow from some kitchen utensil made me pause for a moment. Josh managed to free himself and retreated to the other end of the kitchen. My vision was slightly blurred from the impact, but I was still conscious. When I tried to get up, I realized that I couldn't do it right away. Groaning and swearing, I crawled across the floor toward a stool. "Idiot, you must not be able to handle your alcohol. You've completely lost it," mumbled Josh. "We'll talk when you sober up." After that, he left, and I managed to climb onto the stool. My wife stood to the side with a teapot in her hands, looking at me with fear. "Patrick, I'm sorry. You really lost it. How could you even think that? How could you?" she stammered. "What?" I grumbled. "You dare tell me what to do? Oh, you..." I tried to reach for her, but a sharp pain in my head prevented me from doing so, and I remained seated on the stool. "It's not Josh's fault. You've just gotten so jealous you're seeing things." She put the kettle on. "Are you okay?" she asked pitifully. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it so badly." Rachel approached me with the intention of examining the wound on the back of my head, but that turned out to be her mistake. "You thought I wouldn't find out? You did it right here. How could you even dare?" I said, wanting to pounce on her again. However, she continued speaking. "No, Patrick. Please, no." "What? No, what? I'll settle the score with him later. But with you, I'll deal here and now. And I don't care what happens afterward." "No, Patrick. I'm pregnant." It was only those words that made me stop. I didn't even wonder at first if it was my baby, or if she was telling the truth. Maybe she had decided to say that just to stop me from killing her. I realized that I was still angry at her and my friend for betraying me, but the little person inside her was innocent. "What? Pregnant?" I released her and returned to my stool. "Yes. Didn't you hear me properly? But how? You didn't want this all this time. And you were taking those pills." "Well, I stopped taking them 2 months ago. I wanted to tell you, but you've been acting strangely lately, and I even had my doubts." "Doubts? About what?" I felt that this news was fueling my aggression. However, I remembered all the recent events, and more doubts flooded me. "Stop. What are you saying? Pregnant? So, you're pregnant with that idiot's child? And you thought I would fall for this?" I wanted to attack her again, but she continued speaking. "It's yours. I've been pregnant for a month and a half. I don't understand. Sit down." I took her hand and placed her on another stool next to me. "Okay, let's assume it's mine. But I saw you with Josh. Now explain to me, what the hell does all this mean? How long have you been with him? And what do you mean by it's not him? Speak up, or I can't vouch for myself. I swear, right now, only the child is holding me back." I even took a swing at her to get her scared and tell me the truth. "Okay. I'll tell you everything. But promise me you won't do anything to me. For the sake of our baby. Please." She cried. "What? Don't you dare tell me what to do." I felt my face reddening, and the veins on my face began to bulge with anger. "Okay, talk now. Let's see. Promise me," she said. "Yes, just speak already." My patience was starting to wear thin. "I'm sorry, Patrick. But in the last few months, you've been so nervous and overly jealous that it's been really pissing me off, and I'm just tired of making excuses for you all the time. Recently, after another fight, I just freaked out, and I decided to make sure so you don't keep accusing me of cheating on you." She could see that her story was driving me into a rage and hesitated, wondering if she should continue. "And then what? Why did you stop talking?" I demanded. "I'm worried about the baby," she replied. "I already said it." "Speak." "Well, it happened 3 weeks ago. Josh invited me to meet him. I agreed, thinking it was just a friendly lunch, so I went without any suspicion. But when I got there, he brought Anthony along to our meeting. We talked, and he suggested walking me home. We even took a short walk in the park on our way back. He was so charming at the time. Who? Josh? Are you telling me you cheated on me with him? I asked. No, it was Anthony. I knew it. I didn't like that man right away. I knew he wasn't just sucking up. I couldn't bear it and struck her. Rachel fell to the floor from the blow and cried even louder, pleading for me to spare the baby. How dare you use the child as an excuse? I hissed. Are you carrying is stupid? No, Patrick, I swear. I found out about the pregnancy before I met him. I didn't know whether to believe her or not. I was feeling full of anger and hatred at the moment, and I really wanted to get to that man to tear him to shreds. He was far away for now, though, and I figured I'd be sure to get even with him when I got to him. In the meantime, I wanted all the answers, because I could see that Rachel hadn't told me everything yet. On the one hand, I'd had enough of what she'd already told me, and it was causing me unbearable pain and anger. But on the other hand, I wanted to hear the whole story, no matter how much it hurt me. And what happened next? What happened next? Talk. I insisted. We went out a few times. I thought Josh didn't suspect anything about it, and then Anthony blabbed that he introduced us on purpose. He kind of saw me suffering with you. Well, for his nephew, he wanted a nice and beautiful girl. What? That's complete nonsense. You. And you agreed to that? Damn, you're just twisted. Well, actually he was very nice, she said, and immediately received another slap. I couldn't stand it when my wife cheated on me and called her lover cute. I paced the kitchen, swearing like a cobbler, not knowing how to calm myself down enough not to snap and kill that stupid. If she was telling the truth about carrying my child, I couldn't forgive myself if I did anything to him. I went outside because I felt the need to smoke, hoping that the nicotine would bring me some kind of solution. Leaving Rachel behind, I went to the porch. I stared into the dark road beyond the fence, almost expecting that guy to appear, so I could vent my anger on him. But he didn't show up. The occasional passing cars and a man walking a small dog on a leash were all that interrupted the darkness. I stood there wondering what I should do with my wife. I wanted to punish her severely for cheating on me, but since she was carrying a child, I could not do that. And I have long dreamed of my child, whom I will love and bring up, change his diapers, teach him to ride a bike. These thoughts of a future son, calmed me down a little. And although I was very angry with my wife, I decided to believe her and at least wait until the baby is born. Then I could take a paternity test, which would show me how honest my wife had been with me. I returned to the house. Rachel had gone to the living room and was quietly crying on the couch. I walked over and sat beside her. I still felt uncomfortable being near her, but I decided to speak. So, you're worried about the baby? I asked. She nodded. Well, consider this child your salvation, for now. But only for now. Once he's born, I'll do a DNA test. And if you lied to me, and it's not my. Sure, do whatever you want. Run your damn test. I don't care. I'm sure whose child I'm carrying. Fine. I'll believe you for now. But you must cut off all communication with that scumbag and with Josh too. In fact, with Linda as well. What does Linda have to do with this? Rachel asked, puzzled by my request. I said, do it. And don't say a word about what you've already told me. You'll be staying home all the time. But? What but? Didn't you hear me properly? Otherwise, I can't vouch for myself. I'll end both you and the baby. You won't dare. She tried to blackmail me. Do you want to test that? I raised my fist towards her. Rachel lowered her head, realizing I meant it. And she must have been really worried about the baby, because she'd agreed to all my terms. And now that I'd sorted things out with my wife, I had to come up with a plan to get even with those two mans who'd so cruelly decided to make fun of me. Wow, I never would have thought of something like that. I wonder if Linda has any idea about this. She couldn't have failed to notice that Anthony was seeing my wife. He might as well have told her about his love affairs. But if she knew, Then she's in on this conspiracy against me too. Idiots. What did I ever do to them to make such a mockery of me? I moved to another room for the night. It was very unpleasant to be in the same bed with this woman who had deceived me. For a couple of days, I didn't let on that I already knew. On the contrary, I even called Josh and apologized, telling him that I was just drunk and jealous, but my wife assured me that it wasn't his or her fault. That call was the beginning of my revenge plan. But how exactly to get even with them, I was still thinking about. A few days later, my colleague returned from his vacation. He spent a couple of hours regaling me with stories about his trip. Listening to him, I realized how I could get back at my enemies. He told me about going on a hiking adventure with his family, exploring caves and climbing rocks. I made a mental note of it and started preparing for my payback. I visited a rough neighborhood and found a former classmate of mine. He had some bad luck in life and had gone the wrong way, joining a local gang. I bought some explosives from him and stashed them away for future reference. Then I called Josh. Listen, my friend. I wanted to apologize once more for my behavior. I know you're still upset with me, but please understand that I love Rachel so much. Oh, come on. I've already forgotten about it. That's what friends are for, to occasionally fight with them, he replied with a hint of irony. I'm calling for a reason. I want to invite all of you for a little outing. Let's say it's a nature trip. What do you think? You do love outdoor adventures, I said, exploiting his weakness. You're right. What do you have in mind? He asked. How about this weekend, we head into the mountains? I've found a fantastic spot. The view is amazing, and there's plenty to explore. Josh agreed, and he asked if Rachel was joining us. I told him she had decided to visit her sick mother in another city but assured him it wouldn't affect our trip. I also convinced him to bring Anthony and Linda along, stating that the more, the merrier. Now I was looking forward to the weekend. I told Rachel to keep quiet, and just in case, I even talked her into going to the hospital for a few days for a full checkup, telling her I was worried about the baby because she'd had a lot of stress recently, and I wanted to make sure she was okay. Rachel, hoping that I was almost over my resentment, immediately agreed. After I took her to the hospital, I drove to Josh's house, offering to drive them in my car. The three of them settled in my car, with Josh taking the front seat. Josh kept asking where we were going, but I just said it was a surprise. When we finally arrived and they saw the beautiful, mountainous landscape, Josh commented that I had hit the bullseye with his outdoor preferences. After a few hours of hiking on the slopes, we decided to set up camp for the night. By this time, I had led them to a disused mine entrance and proposed exploring it the next day. Josh and Linda were on board, and Anthony was overjoyed, like a child. I even began to question his sanity. A place to stay, and a few hours of night, would give me a chance to prepare and have a major surprise for those idiots. I only felt sorry for Linda. From all the day's talk, I'd assumed she knew nothing of the devious plan of her husband and his nephew. And I wondered how I could keep her from the fate of her relatives. When we were almost ready for bed and drinking beer by the fire, I said I would go take a piss and get some more wood. I really had to go to the bathroom. But I also wanted to check out the place where I would carry out my revenge plan. But when I got a few meters away, I remembered that I'd forgotten my hiking bag, where I'd been carrying the explosives, and I didn't want any of them to find it, and that would probably be Anthony, who was always messing up backpacks. I went back to get my bag, but as I approached, I heard Josh talking to his wife, trying not to be overheard by Anthony, who was standing nearby, looking at the stars. I have a feeling he's getting suspicious, Linda said. Oh, come on. Anthony is doing a great job playing his part, Josh replied. When I heard this, I thought that I was wrong about Linda and that she knew everything. But as I listened, I realized that wasn't what they were talking about. But he sometimes behaves in a way that could give us away. That's the story we came up with. How can you explain to your friend that your nephew never traveled abroad and just sat for several years in a mental institution? There's no way he'd hire him in his office. Linda, you have nothing to worry about. Anthony isn't stupid enough to admit it. I stood there in some shock at what I had heard. Now I'm confused myself. What did this have to do with anything? or were they preparing some other trick for me? Although, having learned about the asylum, I now understood a certain change in Anthony's behavior, and I wanted to kill this moron even more. Besides, suspecting that Rachel's baby might be his, I had changed my mind about the test, and now I was going to do it before the baby was born, so that I wouldn't give the offspring of a psycho like him a chance to exist. I stepped back a few meters to avoid suspicion that I had overheard their conversation, and then walked noisily, singing a song. "Oh, hey, guys, didn't expect me back so soon, did you?" I forgot my flashlight. I leaned over to my bag and quickly grabbed it. Josh and Linda sat in silence, looking at me. I walked away, leaving them behind, and went to the cave. After doing what I needed, I picked up an armful of dry twigs on the way back. The next day, we went to the old abandoned mine as we had intended. I deliberately led them farther into the depths, motivated by my interest. And when we reached the place specially prepared by me, I told them that I got so carried away that I forgot to call my wife at the agreed time. Asking them to wait for me for a while, I went to a safe distance, took out a remote control from my bag and pressed a button. There was an explosion. All three of them were buried under a pile of rubble and rocks. That's what I wanted. I didn't even feel sorry for Linda, because if she knew about the asylum Anthony was in, she knew about the rest. A club of dust and small rocks slid down the passage with great force and almost caught up with me. I realized that the explosion had been a little stronger than I had expected, and now I might have fallen into my own trap. But on catching up, I rushed to escape, so I don't get screwed. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone about anything. Nobody knew where we were going, and nobody would look for them in that place. I made up a fable for the police too, just in case, that I went to Josh's designated spot, but they never showed up. Here's our second part in this video, enjoy it. I entered the chamber where my wife was. I arranged for her to be here a couple of days ago because she started feeling unwell and was worried about the baby's health. I couldn't help but care about that little, unborn creation, and deep down, I hoped it would be mine. Rachel's recent unhealthy behavior made me doubt if I was the father of the child, and now I intended to find out. After talking to the doctors, I first made sure that everything was fine with the baby after they examined Rachel. Then I asked them how to determine paternity as quickly as possible. They told me we would have to wait at least another month to conduct a test. I agreed to it and, in the meantime, tried to maintain some semblance of a relationship with my wife. I still couldn't forgive her for what she'd done, and I didn't even like being around her. But I was willing to put up with it, and even try to forgive her if she didn't lie to me about the baby, and if she promised me that she would never lie to me again, or give me the slightest reason to doubt her fidelity. She was lying on the bed when I entered, staring into space. When I approached, she turned to me and whispered softly, "What did they say? Is the baby okay?" "Yes," I replied. "The baby is fine. How are you feeling?" "I'm still a little nauseous, and my head hurts." "It will pass. The doctors here are good." I took a stool and sat beside her. "You know, Rachel, I've been doing a lot of thinking again as I wandered the hospital corridors. You hurt me so badly when you went to bed with that man. There's no way I can get it out of my head. I mean, you just... Why you even do that? What's wrong with you?" I was silent for a moment, waiting for her to give me some reasonable answer, or at least apologize. But she just stared at the ceiling again, as if it were a clue to her answers. I stared at her and waited. A tear rolled out of her eye and crawled slowly to her ear. "I don't even know myself. But you've been clinging to me so much lately, always suspicious. I just got tired of it. I did it to spite you. I was wrong, yes, but you're also to blame for this," she finally squeezed out. "What? Do you hear what you're saying right now? How dare you blame me for anything? I did everything for you. And you turned out to be nothing but a society girl. I swear, if it weren't for the baby." I fell silent, and she did too. We sat in silence for some time, and from the expression on her face, I could tell that she realized her mistake. Then I got up and left the room. In the corridor, I met the doctor again and asked how long she still needed to stay here. He said there was no need to worry anymore, and I could take her home by evening. He recommended that she worry less and rest more. By evening, we were back home. She noticed many boxes in the living room, arranged in 2 or 3 rows, taking up a lot of space in the middle of the room. "What's this?" she asked in surprise. "We're moving," I replied dryly. "But why? We've lived here for so many years. I put so much effort into creating this interior. Everything here reminds me of your infidelity," I began, but then remembered the doctor's advice that she shouldn't worry and I tried to change the subject. "I think we'll be better off in a new place. We can start a new life there. Plus, I was offered a job in another city with a higher salary. So, it's all for the best. Do you want something to eat? Did you prepare something while I was away?" "No, but there's also pizza and salad from the store." "All right. Have you didn't pack the plates and pans yet? I'll go prepare something for us." Rachel placed her handbag on an empty part of the table and headed to the kitchen. There was a sense of hope in her voice for our new future, where we could live happily together again, and nothing would mar our well-being. A month passed, and we relocated to a different city. The house I bought for us turned out to be even more spacious than the previous one, and I really liked its layout. It had a huge yard with several outbuildings and even a small garden. The neighborhood was quiet and statistically considered safe. However, just to be on the safe side, I installed an alarm system, just like in our previous home. On a day off, I took my wife to the hospital again. I wanted to dispel my doubts as quickly as possible and finally know how to proceed with her in the future. Rachel was concerned about whether it was safe for the baby, but her attempts to dissuade me didn't work. So, I found myself sitting on a bench in the hospital corridor, awaiting the results. Until the moment of truth, I didn't want to give false hope or pretend to be a loving husband, so Rachel remained in the room alone. Later, the doctor approached me and sat down beside me. "Who's the father?" I asked the most pressing question on my mind without any preamble. We conducted the test very carefully, and as a precaution, we even repeated it to be sure of the results. "I came to inform you that you are the father of the child." During his speech, I felt a strong tension, and each word pushed my anger to the surface. But when he said that my wife had told me the truth and the child was mine, I felt intense relief. It was the most wonderful news I had heard in a long time. I realized that this news should bring me a sense of joy and happiness. But I continued to sit in a daze as emotions swirled within me. Then, I felt a tear roll down my cheek. A tear of happiness. As soon as the moist droplet ran down my face, I seemed to snap out of it and hugged the doctor. Maybe it was a sentimental gesture, but it was the first burst of joy I had experienced in months. "All right, everything's okay," the doctor patted my back, understanding how important this news was for me. "Thank you, doctor. This is the most pleasant news I've had in a while." At that moment, I felt that I could no longer be angry with Rachel and was ready to start a new life with her. I thanked the doctor again and went to her room. By the joy in my face, she understood that the doctor had confirmed her words, and she even shed tears, as now we could begin a fresh chapter in our lives. Several months passed. I eagerly awaited the happy day when I would take my wife and son from the maternity hospital. By that time, I had almost forgotten about her past transgressions, and I hadn't tried to think about it. My son was now my top priority, and I already loved him deeply. Rachel and I had prepared a very lovely nursery for him, and I had ordered a handmade crib from a craftsman I found online. I was ready to do anything for him. Rachel herself turned out to be a very caring and loving mother. In the past, when she had resisted pregnancy, I couldn't have imagined that she could love a child so much. One day, while Rachel was busy in the kitchen preparing dinner, I went to play with the baby. I always enjoyed holding him in my arms, and it seemed to amuse him too. I took him out of his crib, and he looked at me attentively with his still dark blue eyes and made some baby sounds. Holding him in my arms, I smiled at him and told him how much I loved him, and I was looking forward to him growing up so that I could understand him. Walking around the room like that and showing him the new toys I had bought during the day, I walked with him to the window. I wanted to show him the stars in the sky and tell him that he was the most precious star to me. Approaching the window, I pushed the curtain aside and looked outside. It had already gotten dark with the arrival of the evening, and only a few streetlights illuminated the deserted street. "Look, little one, it's such a wonderful evening tonight. It's a pity the sky seems cloudy, and I won't be able to show you the stars and the moon." My gaze, which had been wandering through the sky, went down to the garden, and I saw a shadow near the tree. Or rather, it was not a shadow. I saw a man standing under the tree, but because it was late in the day, he seemed as dark as a shadow. I looked closer and saw a thin, tall man standing motionless and staring at our windows. "What the hell?" I cursed. Quickly descending the stairs, I handed our son to my wife and immediately went outside, armed with a baseball bat that stood in the corner of the hallway. "What happened?" my wife asked me from behind, but I didn't answer her. I was determined to catch the unwanted visitor who had been lurking around our home like a crazy maniac. I jumped outside and went straight to the tree where I had just seen the man. But when I got closer, there was no one there. With bat at the ready, I walked through the garden, thinking that he might be hiding somewhere, but no matter how much I wandered around the yard, I couldn't find anyone. Returning to the house, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a figment of my imagination, and the stranger had simply been a product of my imagination. However, upon entering, I checked the security system and locked the door with all the locks, just to be sure. "Hey, what happened? You seem so agitated," my wife asked me again as she sat on the couch in the living room. "It's nothing. I thought I saw someone," I replied. "What? But who? Did you find someone?" "No. There's no one there," I replied. "I said it just seemed like it. Come on." I went into the kitchen with my wife, took Jack from her, and carried him back to the nursery. After putting him in his crib, I looked out the window again, but there was no one there. The next day, I went to the police just in case, and told them the story of the night visitor. The detective who took my statement questioned me in detail and asked me if I had any enemies, perhaps from the past. But I replied that I had always behaved quite peacefully with everyone, and did not know who might wish to frighten me. At that moment I remembered an event that had happened to me almost a year ago. But that was far in the past, and in a different place, and I was pretty sure that no one had survived under the rubble in the cave. After all, if they hadn't, I would have known about it by now. After concluding that it was probably just neighborhood kids playing, the detective assured me that I had nothing to fear, but just in case, he would send a patrol to our street from time to time and check things out. I had to be satisfied with the little I had been promised, and I left the station. During the day, at work, I thought about the incident from time to time, and called home several times to make sure my wife and son were all right. In the evening, I would occasionally look out the window, but I never saw the stranger again, sometimes only noticing the patrol actually doing their duty and driving down our street. But I couldn't help but notice the concern of my wife, who noticed that I wasn't acting quite calm. "Patrick, will you explain to me what's wrong?" She sat down on the couch in the living room, where I was after another checkup, wanting to just watch TV to relax a little. "I just can't help but get the feeling that someone is watching our house. But it's probably just a patrol. You're the one who asked them to keep an eye out. You know, I don't feel like it myself, though. But I've been home all day, and we haven't even had a neighbor come by. Okay. Let's forget about it. The door's locked, the alarm's on, and if anyone tries to break in, we'll know right away." I clicked the remote and the news channel came on, the newscaster talking about the day's events, but I wasn't interested, so I kept clicking around, looking for an interesting channel. Rachel went to the other room that we had set up as her studio. She never gave up her painting. On the contrary, lately she's been devoting even more attention to it, and her style of painting has changed a bit. There was something in them that had not been there before, and it was as if they were trying to cry out in pain, but at the same time they were calming and made her forget. After about an hour of watching TV, I heard a strange thumping noise from her workshop, as if someone was fighting, and then Rachel's cries. Realizing that something had happened to her, I rushed over. She was sitting on the floor in front of the easel, where the canvas with the future painting was covered with red paint, and Rachel herself was also stained. Without knowing it was just paint, you'd think her face and clothes were stained with blood. I rushed over to her, and she was sitting there crying, wiping her face and smearing paint on it. "What happened, Rachel? Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. "No, I'm not. I feel so terrible, she sobbed. I don't know what's happening to me. It's not me. I can't go on like this anymore. I hugged her. She resisted at first, trying to push me away, but I managed to get her into my arms, and, calming her down, I led her to a chair, where I sat her down at a small table. There was a carafe of water, and I poured some into a glass and gave it to her. Rachel, what happened? Why are you so upset? I couldn't understand. I'm sorry, she replied after taking a sip. I don't know what came over me. I suddenly became so scared. I don't know why this happened. Shoo, it's okay now. Everything's fine. Calm down, I continued to reassure her. Later, I led her to the room, helped her change and wash up, and then tucked her into bed. Her behavior seemed strange to me, but I had no idea why she had this nervous breakdown. After checking on our son, I returned to the living room. I needed a drink myself now. As I approached the bar in the cabinet, a phone call interrupted me. Not knowing who would be calling at such a late hour, I picked up the phone. Hello, I said, but there was silence on the other end, and I could only hear heavy breathing. Hello, I repeated, louder. Well, hello. I'm back. And now I'm taking Rachel. Taking her forever, a voice hissed on the other end. I felt my heart start to pound frantically inside. I recognized that hissing voice, though it was quite quiet. I hadn't heard it in a long time, and I hoped I'd never hear it again. And now it sounded like a harbinger of trouble, a harbinger of my enemy returning from hell. Anthony, whom I had buried in the cave almost a year ago, along with his relatives, was now on the other end of the line, calling me, leaving me with an ominous warning. I stood both scared and angry at the same time, trying to figure out how he'd managed to survive at all, much less find us, since I hadn't advertised my new address anywhere. But it was him. It was him. His voice and accent were unmistakable. So what do we do now? Call the police? But how would I explain to them who he was and why he was following me? The phone emitted short beeps, and I hung up, heading to the liquor cabinet. I was still in a daze, hoping that the call was just my imagination. But I knew it wasn't. After a few sips of whiskey, I began to regain my composure. I sat on the couch, trying to figure out how he had managed to survive. Nothing came to mind. A commercial started on the TV, and I turned it off. The commercials for sedatives were starting to piss me off. The past was rushing back into my life, and I had no idea what consequences would follow. But I had to do something about it. I got up from the couch and walked over to the window. As I looked closer, I noticed a man standing under the tree again, looking straight into my eyes. I thought. Now I knew who it was. In his darkness-covered figure, I recognized Anthony. Now I could even make out his thick sideburns sticking out to the sides. For a moment my attention was distracted by the honking of a police car coming from the other direction, but when I returned my gaze to the spot where I had seen the man, he was gone. I went back to the room, and now it was my job to track that idiot down and finish him off for good this time. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I hoped that his desire to get close to Rachel would help me, because then he'd come to me. All I had to do was think of a trap for him. I didn't tell Rachel anything, not about the call, not about seeing the psychopath standing under our house again. As I pondered, I didn't realize I was in the room where my wife's artwork was. Stopping in front of one of the paintings, I began to look at it. It depicted a forest of drunken trees, with a fire in the distance behind it, as if the forest had been engulfed in flames, and something was visible between the trees, some shadows trying to creep out of the thicket and into our real world. Distracted from the madness that was trying to take over my mind, I went upstairs. Peeking into the bedroom, I saw that my wife had already fallen asleep. I then checked on our little son to make sure he was okay. He was already lying with his eyes closed, occasionally twitching his tiny hands. I carefully adjusted the small blanket to cover him and walked over to the window to ensure it was locked. Satisfied that nothing threatened my family in this house, I went to bed. However, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Dark thoughts kept intruding into my mind, and I was consumed by a deep feeling of hatred. The next day, concerned about my wife's condition, I went to see the doctor who had treated her during labor. I told him about Rachel's strange behavior, and he assured me that it was probably postpartum depression and no cause for great concern. But I also speculated that she might have been reminded of her past sins when I told her about the strange man when I first saw him outside our house, and her emotions were now mixed. Only this was something I didn't dare tell the doctor. The doctor prescribed her a sedative and recommended that she come see him herself for a checkup. Promising that I would talk to her, I left the hospital. Later in the evening, I called a colleague I had become friends with over the past few months and arranged to meet him at a bar. I wanted to share my unpleasant experience with him. However, I couldn't tell him everything, as I wasn't sure he would fully understand me or keep my secret. "Why don't you want to involve the police?" he asked when I mentioned that my family was being stalked by a psychopath from the past. "No. The police. I'm not sure they'll help me. Plus, it's a very personal matter. I want to handle this on my own. Rachel has also been acting nervous lately, as if she senses his presence." "But why is she so nervous?" "You mentioned she was close to him. Maybe she knows about him already, or she's seen him again. Have you considered that?" "What?" "No, that's impossible. She swore to me that she would never give me a reason to doubt her again. Can you trust her? Women, you know. Give them a chance, and they'll mess up. I even got divorced because my wife kept flirting with others, and then she got involved with some idiot. You can't imagine how much I wanted to strangle them both when I caught them in our bed." "Damn it," Greg reminisced with a tinge of sadness, taking another swig of his whiskey. "I understand what you're saying. But Rachel and I have gotten through this. We have a son now. I forgave her for his sake. And this stupid is trying to enter our lives again. But I won't let him. I'll catch him myself." "And what will you do with him?" Greg inquired. "I don't know yet. Listen, you once mentioned that you have a distant relative who could help in a situation like this." "Yes, I do. But I don't even know how to approach him with all of this, and I'm not sure if he'd agree to get involved." "All right. Forget it. I can handle it. If I could just get my hands on him." "Hey, bartender. Can I get another round?" I held out an empty shot glass, and he quickly refilled it. Greg wanted to show himself as a true friend and suggested several revenge options. However, all of them seemed too mild and easy to me. I wanted to deal with this man as harshly as possible. After our conversation, I bid farewell to Greg and headed home. I found my wife in her studio, painting her disturbing pictures and muttering to herself. "Hello, Rachel. What have you been doing all day?" I asked. "Nothing," she answered without taking her eyes off her work and continued to frantically stroke her brush on the canvas. I realized that she didn't care about me and left the workshop. I heard a baby crying on the nanny radio on the table in the living room. I realized that the baby was not happy about something, so I went up to check on him, and I missed him already. "Hey, Rachel, didn't you hear that Jack is crying?" I shouted as I ascended the stairs, but it seemed like she didn't hear me and didn't hurry to come out. I approached the baby's room, fully prepared to change his diapers or offer him a bottle of formula. However, right by the door, I noticed that his cries were no longer audible. "Hey, little man. Did you call me?" "What did my little one want?" I measured him when I reached his crib. It was empty. I frantically looked around the room, searching for my son, but he was nowhere to be found. I then rushed to Rachel, hoping she would tell me where our son was and explain why he wasn't where he should be. "Rachel, where's Jack?" I yelled. "What?" She turned towards me. "Damn it, are you deaf? I'm asking where my son is. I heard him crying, but he's not in his room. Where is he, damn it?" She lowered her head, but he was just there a moment ago. I noticed fear in her eyes and the realization that she had made a mistake once again. At that moment, I heard a raspy voice coming from the baby monitor. Someone was trying to communicate. I went to the living room and activated the intercom button. "Who is this?" I asked irritably. "Oh, you didn't recognize me? Your son is with me. I've taken him. And you won't see him again until I get what I want," the voice replied. "You son of idiot," I shouted. The anger was all over me again, and I tried to call him again and again, asking him where he was and demanding that he give me the baby. But the little radio was silent. Either he had turned it off, or he had gone so far away that the signal was no longer effective. Placing the two-way radio on the table, I gazed at it as if it were an artifact. I felt a mix of sadness and hatred at the same time. Then I heard Rachel's footsteps. Turning around, I saw her standing in the doorway, her face contorted with horror. "How could you? How could you? You've been at home all day. How could you not watch the baby?" I yelled at her. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, unable to respond. In that moment, I felt an urge to strangle her, but I knew it wouldn't help me. Releasing her, I returned to the room. In a panic, Rachel rushed upstairs, running to the nursery, calling out for our son. She returned to me, crying and terrified. "Patrick, he's gone." I turned to her and looked at her like she was a retard. "Are you an idiot? I told you he's missing." "We need to call the police," she said, heading toward the phone. But I quickly caught up with her, snatched the receiver from her hand. "No. The police won't help. I know who took him." "But who?" she asked. "Are you mocking me?" "Your ex-lover." "That's who? Tell me, did you know he was in town? Did you meet him?" I shouted at her. "No. No, Patrick, I swear." "I don't know anything," she stammered, shrinking away, thinking I might start hitting her. I stared at her pathetic appearance, desperately wanting to believe she was telling the truth. I wanted to believe. "Do you even know he was in a mental institution?" I asked. "This stupid never had a job, never went anywhere. He was in a loony bin. And you, like a fool, believed his stories. What on earth attracted you to him? In a mental institution? But how?" "He told me, and Josh and Linda assured me he was in another country." I walked over to her and slapped her across her daydreaming face. "Are you kidding me? How can you doubt my word?" At that moment, the doorbell rang. "Stand here and don't make a sound," I warned her and went to see who it was. Approaching the door, I noticed a flashlight shining through a small window. I opened the door and saw a police officer on the doorstep, with his patrol car parked on the street. "Excuse me." I was passing by and heard some shouting. "Is everything okay here?" the policeman asked. "Yes, everything is fine. My wife and I were just having a conversation, you know, typical family matters." I replied, looking confused. "Are you sure everything is okay?" He tried to peer behind me, but I kept shifting to block his view. "Yes," I said, "everything is fine." The officer glanced behind me and then looked at the front of the house, examining the windows. Satisfied or perhaps uncertain, he turned to leave. It seemed like he believed me. I closed the door and checked that he had left. Then I returned to Rachel, who was still standing there, frightened. "Was that the police?" she asked. "But why didn't you tell them our son is missing? They could help." "Shut up, damn it. I told you I'll handle it myself," I replied, even though I had no idea where to start or what to do. I called Greg and asked him for the contacts of the relative he had told me about. But he replied that the man was unlikely to talk to me, and said he would call him himself and make an appointment. I waited for Greg's call all evening, but it didn't come. It was only late at night, close to midnight, that he finally called and informed me that everything had been arranged, and he would explain the rest during our in-person meeting at work because it was not something to be discussed over the phone. I eagerly awaited the morning. And when I saw Greg, without even saying hello, I immediately started questioning him. He replied that the guy's name is Bob, and he's very busy, but he managed to persuade him to help me. He arranged a meeting in some dive bar, a place even the police dared not venture into, and I had to go there in the evening. I understood that I would have a lot of trouble searching for my son and that psychopath Anthony. So, I went to my boss and asked for a few days off, citing poor health. The boss didn't really want to let me go, but still allowed me to take a few days off, wishing me a speedy recovery and return to my duties. Having obtained what I wanted, I hurried home. I needed to calm down a bit because I was overwhelmed with emotions, and I had to come up with some kind of action plan. Although, at the moment, I didn't know where to start. I hoped this guy, Bob, would meet my expectations, and his abilities would help in my case. Plus, I needed to prepare a substantial sum to pay for his services. Arriving home, I wanted to share the news with my wife that I might soon resolve everything, and then nothing would stand in the way of us living a peaceful life. But I didn't find her at home. Dialing her number, I hoped to find out where she was and when she would return home. Rachel answered after a while. "Where are you?" I asked when she answered. "Patrick, forgive me. But I had to do this. I didn't want our son to get hurt. I'm so sorry. He promised not to harm him." "You're right. He's a complete psychopath." "I don't understand. What are you talking about? Where are you?" "I'm with him. I've been with him for a while now. I should have told you. But I was hoping he wouldn't touch our family." I was shocked by what I heard. Did she get involved in this again? But why again? Maybe Greg was right when he said that if a woman cheated once, she'd do it again. And I forgave her, I trusted her, and she shattered my trust like that. I was left alone. This time, I was completely disappointed in Rachel and lost trust in her forever. But I still had my son, and this son was being threatened by that idiot whom I intended to find and eliminate. Remembering my wife's words that she was with Anthony, I decided to check if her location services were working, which could help me track her. Pressing the right button on my phone, I hoped that the desired signal would work. And yes, a circle appeared on the screen, narrowing down quickly, pinpointing the area. But then it suddenly disappeared, and a message appeared on the screen, "Location not found." "What the hell?" I exclaimed and tried again, hoping it was just a glitch. But I didn't get a positive result. So, I called her number again. However, I heard only short beeps in the receiver, and in a subsequent attempt, the operator said that the subscriber was unavailable. Her phone was probably no longer working. I didn't know what was happening with her at that moment, and I no longer cared about her. I was only concerned about my son. I didn't want to have anything to do with Rachel anymore. However, I now knew the area she was in and decided to start my search independently, without waiting for the meeting with Bob, whom I honestly didn't have much hope for. I got into the car and went to the neighborhood, which looked even more squalid than I had imagined. The deserted street, where many of the houses were empty, was littered with trash and some old cars were parked. There were many houses and I didn't know which one to start with, but I wasn't going to give up. Stopping at the curb, I stared off into the distance, hoping to spot some movement. But other than a few homeless people wandering around in their rags, I saw no one else. I even briefly considered contacting the police. But I realized that when they caught Anthony, he might tell them what I had done in the past with him and his relatives. And that would be a death sentence for me. But I didn't want my boy to stay with him, with that psychopath, and my traitorous wife. So, I dismissed all thoughts of the police and was ready to find the man on my own. At that moment, Greg called me and said that Bob had some free time and was willing to meet me earlier, but I had to bring money because he took half of the payment up front. I understood that I would have a hard time dealing with the task alone and without a weapon, so I agreed to the meeting, which was now scheduled at an abandoned warehouse. When I arrived at the location, I was greeted by several heavily armed thugs, and they immediately aimed their weapons at me. Hey, take it easy. I have an appointment with Bob." I began to slowly get out of the car, raising my hands where they could see them. "My name is Patrick. Where's Bob?" One of the thugs, without lowering his gun, came up to me, scrutinized me, and then nodded for me to head for the entrance, while he walked behind me, and I could feel the sight behind me the whole way. As I walked inside, I noticed that there were two men standing in the distance, actively discussing something. When I got closer, they turned to me, and one of them asked the thug behind me who I was. "I'm Patrick," I answered preemptively. "Greg recommended you. He said you could help. Are you Bob?" "Let's say I am." "So, what do you need?" I briefly explained my problem to him, which now revolved around finding Anthony. I could settle the score with him on my own, but I needed a weapon, and I hoped to acquire one from this thug. Bob named a sum, and I pulled a stack of bills from my pocket, which I had withdrawn from the ATM on the way here. I also shared the information I had managed to gather using my phone, hoping it would expedite the search process. Bob, after hearing me out, moved aside with another guy and whispered about something for a while. That street you're talking about will be cleared for development. But my guys will take a look there. I can't guarantee anything, though. This man you're talking about could be anywhere. Do you not have any connections that could help? I asked provocatively. Bob looked at me with a squinted eye. It seemed he didn't like that I questioned his capabilities. But I didn't care about what he was thinking right now or what he might do to me. I had lost my wife and son, and I wasn't afraid if he decided to shoot me. But he didn't do that. On the contrary, he agreed to help but said it would take some time. He also agreed to sell me a pistol. Now I was fully prepared to meet Anthony. After the meeting with Bob, I headed home. He said I should wait for his call, but this waiting was exhausting, and I wanted to take action on my own. At the most inconvenient moment, when I was about to leave, my neighbor knocked on my door. She had come to visit Rachel and even brought some cookies with her. I replied that my wife wasn't at home and suggested she go back to her place. But for some reason, the neighbor was very persistent and tried to get inside. I wanted to push her out, but I decided to ask her if Rachel had told her anything, maybe shared some female secrets with her. "Oh, God. Something happened to her," exclaimed the neighbor. "No, why do you think that?" I replied. "But since you're asking so many questions, it's likely that Rachel got into trouble. Otherwise, why would you want to know her secrets? So, do you know something or not?" My patience was wearing thin. "And if I do? What will I get out of it?" she asked, smiling. I looked at this woman and started to see another psychopath who wouldn't mind having some fun with someone else's husband. I grabbed her arm and pushed her into the house. "Speak. What do you know?" I asked roughly. "Oh, you're so strong. Damn it." I raised my hand as if to strike her. I didn't care whom I would hit, as long as I got results. The neighbor seemed to be frightened by my actions. Her face immediately turned serious, and she spoke differently. "All right. What's the matter?" I was just joking. It seems that Rachel is really in trouble. "Okay, I'll tell you what I know." Susan squeezed between me and the wall to which I had pushed her and headed into the living room. Sitting on the couch, she told me that not too long ago, Rachel had confided in her with a secret. Rachel shared her past life, including a romantic affair. She spoke of Anthony as an outstanding lover, with whom, unfortunately, she had to part ways. She explained that he had disappeared one day without a word. However, she was already pregnant at that time, and she didn't want to raise a child alone, fearing that I would abandon her. So, she pretended to be a loving wife and even swore fidelity, all the while secretly continuing to love her chosen one. A couple of months ago, she met him again, and even with a huge belly, she still wanted him. He told her to wait, at least until the baby was born. After that, he would figure out how to take her and the baby with him. But Rachel began to suspect that I was onto something or that Anthony might disappear again. She was deeply concerned, and Susan had noticed some changes in her mental state over time. However, Rachel begged her not to tell anyone, and Susan agreed, as she herself wasn't entirely honest with her husband. "What is going on here? It seems like there are nothing but prostitutes around," I thought to myself, but I kept silent, wanting to hear the neighbor out and hoping she would finally say something useful. "Anyway, the last time we met, she said she felt some kind of danger and would do anything to protect her son," Susan said. "Is that all? Did she mention where she was going? Maybe a specific place?" I was lost in speculation, realizing that the neighbor's story not only failed to provide a clue about where to find Rachel but also made me despise her with all my being. I had been so naive to believe her, and all this time I had been living a lie and betrayal. What happened to her then? Susan didn't stop with her questions. "She's missing." "That's what? And I want to find her and the baby." "Sorry, but that's all I know." "Well, wait a second. I think she mentioned once that she had been meeting him in an old house somewhere just a few blocks from here." "I'm not exactly sure where," Susan replied. "Okay, if that's all, it's time for you to leave," I told her. "But I'm leaving. Goodbye. I walked Susan to the exit, but I was seething with anger. I could barely contain myself from smashing everything around me. I thought about what my neighbor had told me, and I remembered that the street I'd driven to was also just a few blocks away. But is this the place where Susan says Rachel met Anthony? A small spark of hope appeared in me, and I decided to drive there again. I was willing to explore house after house, but to find them by all means. I didn't even wait to hear from Bob, and after locking up the house, I was soon on my way to that abandoned street again. By this time, it was getting dark, which worked to my advantage as it made me less conspicuous. I approached each house, listening at the door first and then entering. Fortunately, most of them were not locked, which made my entry easier. After inspecting half of the houses, I realized that Bob's men should also be looking for the scoundrel here, but I didn't see any of them. I was starting to think that Bob had swindled me and kept my money. Realizing I was alone, I was about to continue my search. However, at that moment, I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. The number was not identified, but I answered it anyway. It was Bob. He said his team had searched the area I pointed out, and they had noticed people matching the description of my wife and Anthony in one of the houses, along with a baby. I began to worry that they might have scared him off and asked Bob about that. But he assured me they had acted carefully and completed their end of the deal by finding the culprits I was looking for. Thanking Bob, I promised him that I would bring him the rest of the money soon, and then he gave me the exact address. The house was not on the street I was looking for, but it was almost next door. There was an alleyway leading off the street, which, behind the garbage cans and mesh gates, was hard to see at once. I went in that direction, however, and noticed that there was a large chain with a massive lock attached to the gate behind the bins, and despair that I had been tricked again began to creep in. But then I noticed that one side of the net was not attached to the pipe, and it was possible to enter freely by pushing it aside, which I did. The evening darkness had almost completely covered the street, and the lack of streetlights made it even darker. I crept toward the house, and soon I was near the door. But it was locked. As I began to wonder how to get in, I started looking for another way in. In the trash can, without a lid, I noticed used diapers, so I was on the right path, and it gave me strength and confidence that very soon I will save my son and get even with the villains. The back door was also locked, so I decided to break the window, even though I knew that I could be heard and that it might interfere with my secret entry. And so I did. When I found myself inside the house, and began to make my way into the interior of the room, abruptly lit up a dim light bulb without a chandelier and covered with a large layer of dust, which made the illumination seem even paler. A tall man with sideburns stood before me. "You!" I hissed, preparing to lunge at him. But he held his hand out to the side and pulled Rachel, who was holding a baby in her arms, out of the corner and held a knife to her throat. "Long time no see," he replied. "How are things on the other side?" I sneered. "As you can see, they're not quite ready to welcome me there." "Did you come for Rachel?" "But she doesn't want to be with you." "Right, Rachel?" "I don't care about her." "I came for my son," I said and pulled out my gun, aiming it at Anthony. "Ha, do you think this lowly pistol will hurt me? Haven't you realized? I'm immortal. You killed me once, and here I am." He answered me and pressed the knife harder against Rachel's throat, causing the blade to sink in and a few drops of blood to seep from underneath. "Don't do it, let them go." I wasn't going to back down. Anthony, too, apparently. But when he realized that threats against Rachel wasn't working on me, he pulled the knife away from her and pointed it at the baby. "Like this? What will you say now?" he sneered. "All right," I replied and slowly began to lower my weapon to the floor. "But why are you using the baby as a shield? Let's settle this between us. If you're so all-powerful, why are you afraid of me? Look, I'm unarmed. Or do you have a weakness for beating me?" My words seemed to work on him. He pushed Rachel away and assumed an attacker's stance. Growling and smirking, he prepared to attack me, even waving his huge knife in the air a few times. I'll be honest, I even felt a little scared for a moment. But I quickly got over my fear, and I was ready to fight. And Anthony finally made the first move and came at me. By some miracle I managed to grab his hand, where he was holding the knife, and we fought for a while, where he tried to stab me with the blade and I tried to keep him from doing so. But Anthony was much stronger than I thought. Even though he was thin, I could feel his strength. And the blade was about to reach my cheek and even scratched a little. At that moment we tripped over something and fell, both of us, to the floor, where we continued our struggle. I noticed some piece of wood on the floor, reached over and hit the villain with a full swing. This helped me a little, and Anthony backed off a little. At that moment, I was able to twist his arm, to which as if the knife was glued, and turned it toward Anthony. I managed to hit him a few times with my other hand, but he didn't seem to feel my blows at all, so I continued to press the knife. "You're so foolish. You think you've outsmarted me, but you're the real fool," he sneered. "You fight so hard for this child, and you don't even know he's not yours. What are you talking about? Do you think saying this will save you from me?" I replied, but I began to ponder his words. "Jack is my son. I know everything about you. I even know that you underwent a paternity test. But I've been watching you for a long time. At the hospital, I replaced my blood with yours. Those incompetent doctors didn't notice a thing. They thought they were examining your blood. Ha! What fools! Ha!" Anthony laughed at me, hoping that his confession would make me weak. But I seized the moment and pressed down hard on his hand, where he still held the knife tightly. The point stuck into his chin, pierced the whole skull, and the end of it showed out of the scoundrel's head. When this happened, I stood still for a moment and looked at his pierced skull, from which a great deal of blood flowed rapidly, and I even thought I saw a certain amount of brains spilling out of the wound. Regaining my composure, I stood up. "Immortal, huh?" I said to the lifeless body. Now he was undoubtedly dead. I walked over to Rachel, who was holding the baby and staring at the scene in shock. "He told the truth? The child is not mine?" I asked, but there was no answer. I yelled, "Answer me." "Yes," she replied abruptly, as if she had just returned from another world. "But you said you got pregnant before you met him." I lied. "I had to." "You wondered why he was born prematurely, didn't you?" I realized that the truth was even worse than I had expected. I took the baby from her hands, and she didn't even resist. Then I slapped her hard, and she passed out. The baby cried, and I rocked him a little in my arms. "It's okay, little one. I won't let anything happen to you." When he calmed down, I called Greg and asked him to contact Bob, as I didn't have Bob's number. After Bob got in touch with me, I relayed my request. "I'm grateful for your help. I'll pay you double if your guys clean up this place," I told him. Bob agreed, and I was about to hang up the call, but I noticed Rachel lying on the floor. "There's one more thing," I said. "There's a woman here, the one I told you about. She should be in a mental institution somewhere so she can stay there longer." Bob agreed to that, too. Me and my son left the goddamn shelter. I was going to keep him with me. In the short time I had been with him, I had grown to love him, and I had grown very attached to him. Now I was going to move again, maybe even to another country, where I would raise my son myself and make sure he didn't become a psychopath like his biological father. Yes, all of these events have had an indelible effect on me. If someone had told me that I would have such events in my life, I would have laughed in their face. But I realized that life isn't just made up of good things. It sometimes throws up some serious challenges. I'm 57 years old now. I never got married. My son is an adult. And I'm very glad he didn't have any physiological abnormalities. I'm really happy now. My son is already married and I'm getting ready to become a grandfather. They are my nearest and dearest people. And I have often thought how I would act now in this situation. But I always catch myself thinking that I did the right thing. I knew nothing about my ex-wife. And I was not interested in her fate at all. I have become a model parishioner in our church. And I periodically pray for the repose of the souls of all my enemies whom I had to kill. Thank you for listening to me. What do you think of our stories today? In my opinion, both stories were quite interesting and attractive to listen to, and I understood Patrick's feelings very well and close to my heart. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.